Today we are here for the webinar on forgetting food. For your kind information, this is just an official intro, and we are recording this session, and this session is being live streamed in YouTube. For those who are joining from Laos, you can click on the interpretation icon and you can listen to me in Laos. So we are here with 188 participants and we are good to go. We'll be starting this webinar now. So hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone based on whichever part of the world you are. I am Sasireka Rajendran. I'm a project associate at the Asia Pacific Association of Agricultural Research Institutions. I would like to welcome all the moderators, speakers, farmers, participants, and my colleagues who joined us today from different locations through virtual platform under this special circumstance. It is my great privilege to moderate today's international webinar on regional consultation on forgotten foods in Asia Pacific, developing a regional manifesto organized by APARI, Global Forum of Agricultural Research, GFAR, Alliance Biodiversity, CIAT, Asia Farmers Association, AFA, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, International Crop Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics, and Barley Development Institute for Rural Women. We are so excited to see the wide range of participants who have registered for today's webinar from various countries. We have over 450 participants registered for today's webinar from all over the world. I'm pretty sure you're looking forward for this webinar the same way I am. Before going into the webinar, I would like to highlight some housekeeping to ensure smooth running of webinar without interpretations. I request the participants and speakers to keep their video and microphone off during the presentation. You can either use the chat box or raise hands options to post your questions. The meeting is being live streamed in APARI Thailand YouTube channel and is being recorded. Kindly log in with your name and country name to help us in adding you to the breakout rooms. Today's webinar would be highlighting regional consultation on forgotten food. Will seek information set priorities for collective action to promote research, innovation, education, sustainable production, processing, marketing, and consumption of forgotten food. With this basic introduction and no further ado, I will get started by letting our speakers take over the session. It gives me immense pleasure to invite the first speaker of today's session, Dr. Ravi Ketrapal, Executive Secretary of APARI, the guiding force behind this webinar, to provide the background. Over to you, Dr. Ravi.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I welcome you all on behalf of all the APARI members, which are 80 plus in number. I welcome you on behalf of all the organizers who are jointly organizing it. APARI is simply using its platform. It is a joint effort. Now, this webinar, to begin with, is sponsored by Global Forum of Agriculture Research. And at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Matthew Montavan, the Executive Secretary, who has been kind enough to consider APARI as one of the regional partners to fulfill certain collective actions of GFAR. Also, we would like to thank European Commission, which has funded GFAR a lot for various collective actions, and this is a part of that. The topic is very interesting and requires attention from all of us, from all walks of life. Why it is very interesting? I would like to give you a brief on the importance of forgotten food and what all we are going to do in the webinar, and then Alexandro and Carlo, if he's there, will highlight on the overall ultimate goal and aim what we are planning to seek through this webinar. Next. Let us get the facts right. There are so many points for which forgotten foods are called forgotten foods. I have picked up three most important, which I felt there may be many more. Number one is excessive focus on staple crops like wheat, rice, potato, soybean, cassava, and so on. In the process, we lost nutrition-rich and resilient species. Then many crops forgotten by the formal research systems. And hence the forgotten food, what we call, they vanished away from the value and supply chains. And to cap it all, the agriculture, innovation, and technology and research, what we talk a lot, has landed up with limited adoption by farmers and end users, whether we like it or not. And this is mainly because of the lack of focus on co-learning and co-innovation system where we involve the smallest denominators. Hence the forgotten food. With this background, I would like to also highlight forgotten food has got many connotations in literature. I have listed a number of them, there may be more. Let us not get lost during the webinar on the terminologies of underutilized species or neglected crop or smart crops or whatever. Let us see the crops which are foods come from crops, so we call forgotten foods in the general parlance, but it's basically the species, the crop we are talking about. All of them have not got the right view in the course of evolution because of the reasons I mentioned above. We will be restricting to forgotten food, which will mean something, a crop, a species, underutilized, underexploited, or any kind of a species which is not in vogue. Next. Now, this PowerPoint gives you a clear picture of the whole process, what collective action on forgotten foods is being initiated by GFAR. In brief, Alexander may be able to highlight more after I stop speaking, but there's been an effort by GFAR to have regional networks, or to work on a regional manifesto, to have a shared vision or a shared concept, what they call the regional manifesto, which will bring a kind of a consensus around a new vision of research and innovation system for enhancing cultural, ethnic, culinary, and biodiversity of the forgotten foods. We are playing our role from APARI, FARA in Africa, and Alinina also that have already had their webinars. And we are right now in the webinar of APARI, which will feed into finally our regional manifesto. Our output will feed into a global manifesto, which is intended to come up with a plan of action at a global level. And also there'll be a discussion on the FAO Science Days after that, before the UN Food System UN Food Summit Systems. I'm sorry for the spelling mistake here. UN Food System Summit, which will be held in September. So in brief, we are right now in the Asia Pacific webinar. And the methodology that we have adopted, which will be coming up in the presentation of many of our partners and colleagues, will be the result of an online survey we have carried out extensively. And let me say, it is not a very scientific survey. It was decided a bit late, but we could reach as many people as possible with our networks. And we will be telling you the findings of what happened in the online survey. We had a number of face-to-face and online meetings. We had some mini workshops. And today we are having our regional consultation in this regional webinar with multi-stakeholder participation. And I would like to acknowledge the very active support here of GFAR, Alliance Biodiversity International SIAT, and also Crop for Future. By default, that way I acknowledge the support from Alexander from GFAR, Carlo and Rumi from Alliance Biodiversity, and Syed from Crop for Future, who has been technically engaged with us, though it is we who are organizing as Asia Partners, APARI, Asia Farmer Association, Asian Farmers Association, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, ICRISAT, and Bali Development Institute for Rural Women, as was said before in the introduction. So it is a pure collective effort which we are following. And next, please. I find personally this opportunity of having this exercise done as a unique opportunity for us in the Asia-Pacific region. Because we can now capitalize on the demography of Asia-Pacific region. If you see on the right-hand side, we represent 60% of the world population. So the voice of Asia-Pacific is apparently going to be quite important in the
ร่วมกันเข้าเป็นกลุ่มจะเฮ็ดให้เฮามีสิทธิ์มีเสียงหลายขึ้น
in the global manifesto, and we feel that the diversity of Asia-Pacific will push the agenda much more. We have all kinds of diversity here, whether it's a biodiversity, economic diversity, we have cultural diversity, we have ethnic diversity, we have culinary diversities, all kinds of diversities which exist here, and a lot of local and indigenous knowledge of farmers. These are three very important reasons, I believe, for which we need to capitalize on. And to focus on these three bullets, what I was saying, we have a support of the global community. That is GFAR here and the international organizations. This support, I think, will set the ball rolling, because at times you have ideas, but you don't have a support. And we feel very happy to be a part of this collective, ultimately a global action plan, where we would be playing our role as much as we can from the Asia-Pacific region. Along with all the actors, farmers and other innovation actors in the region, what we need to do is to define or redefine the research systems and value chain. This is where we need a transformation into the agriculture and research and innovation system, which we'll be discussing in the course of the webinar. With this, I would like to end here, and I would like to thank all of you for your patient listening, for participating, and for your engagement with us. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ravi. Such a wonderful start and brief on the webinar. Now I would like to welcome Mr. Alessandro, Consultant, Collective Action for Forgotten Foods, GFAR. Alessandro joined GFAR in 2017 to coordinate the area of empowering farmers at Center of Innovation, contributing to shaping its collective actions according to co-innovation and co-research principles applied to the governance of research. Alessandro, please, the stage is yours. Before he begins, I also would like to inform the participants that you can use the interpretation icon to listen this webinar in Laos, Mongolian, and then in Bengali languages. Alexander, please go ahead. Thank you. Alessandro, can you hear us? I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, dear partners of the Global Forum for Agricultural Research and Innovation, it is truly my pleasure to welcome everyone to this important virtual event with a focus on the elaboration of the Asia-Pacific Manifesto on Forgotten Foods, which is a part of the global manifesto, which will provide a framework of shared values, operational principles, and concrete strategies to help smallholders adapt actions and policies within their own communities and countries to serve their own interests. The manifesto will serve as a guide, as Dr. Ravi just mentioned, for adjusting pro-poor research and pro-poor innovation strategies on agricultural crops to accelerate the pro-poor use of biodiversity. The terminology is subject to a lively debate. We use this term, forgotten foods, because it is related to the particular circumstance we are addressing at the moment, the problem-solving dimension. Other, potentially more positive and promising definitions will certainly emerge during this and other discussion as we move along the development of new activities. I could add my own voice to define these crops as pro-poor or anti-poverty crops, for they provide a huge potential to contribute to more resilient, more affordable, better accessible, more nutritious food in an era of multiple challenges to food security, especially for the poor smallholders. At GFAR, we see economic poverty going hand in hand with what could be called expression poverty, which means the lack of a voice on issues affecting one's own prosperity and future. We also believe in the importance of overcoming another type of poverty, which we could define symbolic poverty, the way the poor are defined or define themselves in many research and development initiatives, which needs to be reversed in order to boost their self-esteem, self-confidence, and pride. We believe that with this broad perspective, the farmers and the rural communities will need to become active participants in the pathway to self-determination rather than remain only more or less passive beneficiaries of interventions designed for them and on their behalf. It is our considered opinion that unlocking the huge human and ingenuity potentials in the rural communities through the Forgotten Food Initiative will be a powerful, empowering path to poverty reduction, and in generating solutions, adapted solutions, and adoptable solutions to the issues of food and nutritional security. This is the heart of the initiative, to provide engagement opportunities for farmers as key agents of change, to leverage local capacities around forgotten foods, maximizing the use and benefit of different sources of knowledge in addressing shared challenges, such as defining and encouraging impactful collaborative research on climate change-resistant crops. We are intent on placing farmers at the center of innovation. By focusing on the small farmer, we will ensure an agri-food and innovation system that is more integrated, inclusive, equitable, and responsive, bringing forgotten foods in a fully fledged way into the institutional research environment with their transformative potential. This initiative on forgotten foods is being coordinated at the global level by GFAR and the CGIAR Center, the Alliance of Biodiversity, and CIAT. We call this, in the GFAR context, a collective action because of our principle of multi-stakeholder collaborative participation, getting all families of actors in research and innovation together. In addition to this activity in Asia Pacific, we are engaging other stakeholders, including regional research networks, farmer organizations, and NGOs in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in Africa. Following regional consultations, such as the one we're having today, we will have a global meeting in June to agree on a coordinated global manifesto on forgotten foods, including Latin America, and we'll set up a community of practice to prepare a plan of action as a basis for donor funding and implementation beginning in 2022. This is not a manifesto for the archives, but a foundation for implementable programs and actions contributing to fighting hunger. we also have a great opportunity to herald this great notion at the global level in the upcoming UN Food System Summit, with hope that this will generate strong attention and command resources for an initiative that will give birth to the much desired change. As I said, the manifesto will give an opportunity to the smallholder producers to voice their perspectives on forgotten foods. But not only their perspectives, their knowledge, their initiatives, their grassroots creativity and innovations, around which an enabling environment can be built, relying on the full ownership of the agenda by the rural communities. Hence, if we talk of poor people crops, which is one of the definitions that has been used, which seems to have a negative connotation for some, we need to refer to support defined by poor people themselves, as this appears in their own declaration that will be presented during the webinar. We give prominence to a new role and modality of research and innovation system functioning in order to empower farmers with their initiatives and knowledge as co-researchers and co-innovators. This is not the only solution to unlock the potential of forgotten foods, but an important element of the equation to be addressed at the national, regional, and global levels. These are precisely the dynamics of transformation we wish also to contribute to the CGIAR reform dynamic, which is ongoing, to a new science that will include the so-called citizen scientists in a logic of research democratization, while the other suggestions, more of developmental nature, input supply, marketing, seed systems, and other supports, will be part of project proposals to be developed by the community of practice that is being formed around the manifesto, and which will be submitted to the donors, always with farmers playing a propulsive role. Let me conclude by saying that I wish to thank APARI and all the organizing partners that have been mentioned by Dr. Ravi for the strong commitment and belief in this collective action they have shown throughout this endeavor up to now. I want to underline that this commitment, this belief, is our biggest relational capital to demonstrate and envisage in a consistent way how to walk the talk. Our recognition goes also to the European community for supporting GFAR and our partners and enabling this activity, among other collective actions, to take place. Thank you very much, and all the best for this very important webinar.
Thank you so much, Alessandro, for this brief intro and stressing the importance of this webinar and manifesto. Now I request Dr. Rooney from Alliance Biodiversity CR to give his view on the webinar.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT, and in particular on behalf of my colleague, Carlo Fada, who is the director of the Biodiversity and Agricultural Program. He is still trying to connect, but has some problems with that. So for us, it's a real honor and a pleasure to be part of this group, this collective initiative, which we fully support. I think many of you probably know that we have done in what was previously called IPCRI and then Biodiversity International. We have done about 30 years of research on forgotten crops, and we still think more needs to be done. And so I think this initiative is very important, both in the regions, but also, of course, at the global level, to move the agenda forward and to bring about the real change in support and to empower local farmers in the local communities. So I look forward to listening to all of you and to contribute to put together a synthesis that we can move forward to the global level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rooney, for a very short and crisp intro. With this background, it is time for us to move into the most awaited technical sessions of the webinar. I would like to introduce Dr. Syed Assam Ali, Chief Executive Officer at the Crops for the Future Malaysia. Professor Syed was instrumental in the establishment of CFF as the world's first center dedicated to research on underutilized crops for food and non-food use. I now request Dr. Syed to take over the first session on perceptions about the forgotten foods. Dr. Syed, the session is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sasi, and my greetings to all of you. And I'm really excited to be chairing this session. If I may just say, I've been working on underutilized crops for over 40 years, and I'm very, very enthused and energized by the attendance at this meeting and the whole the initiative of the Manifesto. To quote Victor Hugo, the French poet and novelist, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And I think the idea and the time has come. It's our challenge now to do two things, touching on Alessandro's earlier comment, what we do on underutilized crops and forgotten foods, and how we do it. So those are our ultimate challenges. Now in this session, we have 40 minutes, and I will try and leave the speakers to speak as much of the time that they've been allocated. If there's time afterwards, then of course we will have an opportunity for questions, which I'll be happy to put from your perspective and from the presenters. So our three speakers, as a courtesy to each of them, I would remind each just about 1 minute before your time is up that you're coming to the end of your allocation, and so that we can remain close enough to our schedule. And the CVs are already there, so I won't introduce the speakers except by name and title. Our first speaker is Ronnie Vernot, who you've already just heard from, of the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAD. Ronnie.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to share some reflections on an action learning agenda for forgotten foods. I think it's fair to say that this presentation is representing the work that we have been doing and continue to do at the Alliance. And we are lucky enough to have a strong team in the field working every day with farmers on this topic. Next slide, please. Yeah, let me start by posing you all a question, and you can think about the answer during my presentation and during today's webinar. What's in a field? Next, please. My first part of the presentation is about the values and why it is important to focus on forgotten crops. Dr. Ravi has already alluded to some of those things, but I thought let's not only look at the functions like food and medicine and fodder, etc., but also what it actually takes for farmers to work, to produce and process and manage forgotten crops. And I think if you take this broader perspective, then I think it's a sort of eye-opener to grasp the importance of the forgotten crops in everyday life of farmers. And so I've listed here some of the things that need to be done to produce forgotten crops, to manage them, to process them, to share them, to cook them, to store them. And so I think it's important that we keep in mind this broad perspective on what we could call the values of forgotten crops. And one that is particularly becoming more important also in our research work is adaptation to the impact of climate change. I think this is becoming so important, and we know that farmers everywhere in the world are struggling with this. And I think we need to assign a much stronger role to the power of forgotten crops as an element in strategies to adapt to climate change. Next one, please. Then let's move to the science of forgotten crops. I already mentioned that Biodiversity International, and before it was called IPCRI, we started working on this about maybe 30 years ago, which I think in terms of the history of science is still not a very long time. So I think we are still kind of you know, is still a young science. I would call it a young science. But I think thanks to the work of some of the colleagues, we know a lot. And I think especially the question of how, I think we have moved along very much. And IFAD this year, together with the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, we published these 5 guides, how to do guides, which really, I think, is a wonderful state-of-the-art product that can guide all of us to do the work on forgotten crops from, we can say, from the farm to the fork, but also addressing policy issues. The number 5th booklet in this series speaks about how to address how to promote forgotten crops and put it on the policy agenda. So I think we have come a long way, and I all encourage you to use these booklets in your research and other activities. That they are very well written and is full of practical examples from all over the world. Next one. However, as has already been mentioned, I think we're still facing that they are under-researched. And in this sense, we can say they are neglected by science and technology. I've just completed a literature review about NUS in Ghana, which is a country in West Africa, which was commissioned by the Dutch government. And I actually found that if you look at the research that has been published, it's not so broad as we would expect. There's a lot of research on identification and characterization of forgotten food crops. There is some work increasingly about the nutrient composition of them, about what people consume and how much. And then, of course, we have now a few of those, what I call star crops, that have been promoted in different parts of the world, such as teff, the rocket salad, millet in India, quinoa in Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador. But I think it's fair to say that we're still lacking more attention to what are the concerns of farmers and the interests of farmers to work on forgotten crops. And I think these have to do with things like conservation. I think we need to do a better job in conserving forgotten crops, both in the field and in situ, in farmers' community seed banks or other storage facilities. I think seed management is still a big issue. And I think crop improvement is probably a whole new area that we could explore when it comes to forgotten crops. And then I think there are many policy and legal bottlenecks at the national and international level that we need to address. Next one. So I've put together a few components which I think we can all work on together to move the agenda forward. Next, please. I think the first one, I call it new professionalism. I think all of us involved in research, education and training and policy making, I think we need to change how we go about our work and turn what we usually tend to do as supply-driven into a demand-driven approach, which truly is responsive to farmers' needs and interests. I think all of our work should be focused on sustainable development, including adaptation to climate change, which I have already stressed. I see also a new role for us as researchers, which is not only to produce good knowledge, but also to build bridges between different stakeholders. We can say we should be taken on role as facilitators. I think in the way we appraise our work, I think we also have to make some changes and not only count the number of scientific articles that we publish or how many times we appear on conferences and seminars, but look more at the jointly produced results. And for example, how together we could have an impact on policy formulation and implementation. So in brief, it means new incentives and new rewards. Next one. I think this goes hand in hand with what I call a new division of labor. we really should move to a shared priority setting and decision-making agenda and do much more collaborative work together with farmers in particular, but also with other stakeholders. I think when it comes more to the development agenda, there is still a long way to go and get farmers represented in key decision-making or advisory bodies, such as national variety release committees or agrobiodiversity commissions, or even research councils. I think we need to push more the agenda towards decentralization. And very important, I think we need to be better in doing multi, inter, and transdisciplinary teamwork, bringing people together with different disciplinary backgrounds and really do teamwork. Next. The third component, I think, is new partnerships. We have already made a good start, and this initiative is, of course, a good example where we bring together multi-stakeholders and do something that we agree all together on. But also in the development arena, we can think about new producer-consumer agreements. For example, community-supported agricultural contracts. And then I think we can do better in working directly with farmers, such as self-help groups, community seed banks, seed clubs, etc., etc. And last but not least, I think we can also do much better in giving decision-making power about the funds, the resources to farmers themselves. Next.
Ronnie, can I ask you to just come to the end in the next minute or so, please?
It is the last slide, yeah. So thank you. So the last component of the new agenda, I think, is about curriculum development. And I have listed here some of the examples of how I think this could easily be done. And this goes from primary school to university courses. Next one. The last one. However, I think, and this is, no, sorry, previous one. Yeah. Apart from the agenda that I have set out in the previous slides, I think there's also a lot of things we can do all together. And this was highlighted at the Africa webinar last week. We can showcase and display forgotten crops when we have meetings and conferences. We can serve forgotten crops on the lunches and dinners when we meet. And of course, we can also, I think all of us, try to grow some of them in on our balcony or in our home gardens. Last one. Yeah, what's in the field? Thank you very much. Last one, next one. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for inviting me to share some of my reflections on the forgotten crops and foods, work done in the past, and, and some ideas for the future. Over.
Thank you, Ronnie, and thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. There was a question that just came up, which I thought someone asked, what have we learned and what have we done wrong in the last 40 years? Of my experience with underutilized crops and forgotten foods. And I think our next speaker will illustrate exactly what we've done wrong. We haven't put farmers at the center of this initiative in innovation. And I think that is critical to the new direction that this manifesto will take us. So our next speaker, Irish Baguila, is of the Asian Farmers Association. Irish.
Yes, thank you, Syed, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. So today I am representing the network of Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development and also the network and constituency of MS Swaminathan Foundation. So I will be sharing a survey that was undertaken in partnership with 25 organizations. Sorry, give me just a few seconds. So our farmers are from the different sub-region, including 2 countries from the Pacific. So I just wanted to acknowledge the different farmers organization and also civil society and non-government organization who took part in the survey. And these are the provinces which was also covered in India and the partners of MS Swaminathan. So the survey was conducted in preparation to this webinar, and it is largely in line with the objective of this event, that is to facilitate the recognition of different stakeholders on the importance and value of indigenous crops to farming communities, and also recognize their efforts to conserve and the needed support they need from across sector. And also the results and recommendation from the farmers organization and CSO partners was packaged into a farmers declaration that will hopefully enrich the ongoing discussion and initiatives on forgotten food or underutilized species. So as you can see on the screen, a 6-step process was undertaken, a joint designing of the questions by all the collective action partners, translation done by the national partners, and orientation and discussion with all the sub-national and national partners, and then the actual conduct of interview and so on. So the survey was done in March and June of 2021, involving 19 countries. During the survey, the national partners encoded the information using the Google form that we have provided. And there were 18 questions that were asked, categorized as general information, and there are questions related to awareness, innovation, and the support. And as already mentioned, a farmer's declaration was produced out of the survey and the discussion, and it will be shared with you via the chat box. So please find time to download the document and go through it later. Sorry, it's taking time for my PowerPoint to move, so. Okay, so a total of 3,887 farmers were part of this undertaking in 4 Asia sub-region and 2 countries in the Pacific region. So that's the percentage. As you can see, 71% of those that we have reached were from India. So these are the 19 countries where the survey was conducted. And the provinces in India where MSSRF did the interviews. So here you can see that the percentage of female and male farmers that were part of the survey. And you can see that 48% of the farmers are ages 41 to 60 years old. Here you can see that majority of them owns or cultivate up to 2 hectares of land. And that most of the farmers who were part of the survey practice rain-fed agriculture, mixed farming, and also 38% has irrigated farms. And here you see that the traditional food crops are grown in their own farm. So 79% said that the source of traditional food crops comes from their own family farms. So now let us see the first set of questions related to awareness. So as you can see on the screen, most farmers interviewed continue to cultivate traditional food crops, even though, as said earlier, it was forgotten by the other sectors of society. When asked to list down or identify the crops being cultivated, farmers have identified a range of crops including fruits, vegetables, legumes, leafy root crops, fruit-bearing plantation crops, grain crops, and cereal crops. And for those who are no longer growing indigenous or traditional crops, they've also given the following reasons. So you can see here that according to them, these crops are not profitable, has low demand, low productivity, and also there are responses related to promotion of commercial crops and non-promotion of indigenous crops. When asked about their source of knowledge for traditional crops, here we see that most of them were inherited or passed down knowledge. And then a percentage of the farmers also said that it is from their own experimentation and from the training provided by development partners. So we also asked about the limitations and challenges in cultivating traditional crops. So you see here that marketing was identified by most farmers, followed by seed system related challenges, which confirms what was mentioned by Ronnie earlier, and then selection of varieties and processing. Here in this slide, you see that most support come from their fellow farmers. Could be through a sharing of knowledge during informal social events, and also the traditional practice of sharing seeds. And then 18% said there's no external support given to them. So the next slide will show you the responses related to the questions under innovation. So 80% said that they have introduced their own innovation related to production, processing, marketing of traditional crops. And here on the screen, you see the list of innovations introduced by farmers. So under production, you can see that most of the innovations are related to diversification and intensification, such as intercropping of tubers with plantation crops or pulses with cereals and millets. On marketing, direct marketing is being done through their cooperatives. They are also doing home delivery, and virtual markets is also being explored. On seed production, farmers have community seed banks, they practice seed exchange, and they continue to practice kudir. So now at this juncture, I wanted to ask three of my colleagues from the different three organizations to quickly share their existing initiative in 3 different countries. So first, I would like to call on Meenakshi Ben from the Self-Employed Women's Association to share what they are doing in India. So kindly raise your hand so that you can be unmuted, Meenakshi Ben. Okay, so I can see that Meenakshi Ben raised her hand. So quickly, she would be sharing what they are currently doing in their big enterprise called Rudy. So over to you, Meenakshi Ben.
Thank you, Arishben. A very good afternoon to all the participants present. I am Meenakshi Chaudhary from Seva. And today I'm going to present before you a strategy that we developed to bring forgotten foods into the mainstream. So it is the case of Rudy and Kamla, and it started with a question that why the farmers who grow foods are the ones who remain hungry or suffer from malnutrition. So what we find in many cases that even small and marginal farmers, they are growing cash crop for income. And from the small income that they have, they try to buy food, which leads to poorer nutrition among them. So as a solution, Seva and Kamla initiatives were established. Rudy and Kamla initiatives for food and nutrition security were established, and they are based on a 100-mile concept That is all the processing, procurement, and majority of the sales, it's done within the 100 miles. And it's a decentralized supply chain. So RUDI is the rural distribution network that procures grains, pulses, spices, and other commodities from the small and marginal farmers and markets it to the local consumers. Kamla, which is Seva's organic and traditional food processing center, their trainings have been provided to the members to sell snacks. So how is it helping? So through Kamla, we are trying to promote green and sustainable lifestyle. This is a place where people can come, they can learn to cook recipes which are nutrition based from many of the crops which are not in the mainstream. So what we are trying to do is that using marginalized crops such as bajra, jowar, which are millets, and jaw, which have sustained us for many centuries, but today they are not on the regular plates. We try to promote them. We try to process them into goods which are actually eaten by the younger generation, for which the market exists. So we process them into breads, cookies, etc., so that it comes to the mainstream. So what has been the impact of these initiatives? So it ensures access to safe and nutritional food, shift to sustainable consumption pattern, boosts nature positive producers, advanced equitable livelihoods, build food supply chains that are resilient. And the most important is that the ownership and the control is in the hands of community. And the profits are also distributed among the community. There's increase in the transparency and traceability across the value chain, and it increases the awareness about millets at local and also in urban areas, thus leading to increase in the consumption of these forgotten foods. I think I must have taken more than 2 minutes, but I think if Arishben, it will be possible for you to play the link. It's essential. It brings out the essence beautifully for what we are doing and trying to achieve. And thank you for your time, all of you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Meenakshi. So we will just be sharing the link on the chat box, and then the participants can click on the link to see the interesting work that Sewa has done. So I would encourage all participants to check on the YouTube link that we will be posting. So thank you, Meenakshi, for emphasizing on the cooperative development or enterprise model that plays a role in promoting traditional food for nutrition. So next, I would call the last one. I believe I would like to call on Angela Burke of the PFON, that's Pacific Island Farmers Organization Network, to share what they are doing on the Pacific Breadfruit and Seeds Program. Angela?
Thank you, Irish. Please excuse me, my reception, internet connection is not the best. I'm going to have to leave my video off. Pacific greetings to one and all. As Irish mentioned, Pacific Farmer Organizations, otherwise known as PIFON. We are a regional organization with 23 farmer organization members across 9 countries. And the 9 countries are the Cook Islands, New Caledonia, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Fiji. And one of our 6 strategic pillars is that of Pacific breadfruit. It's very much a climate resilient crop. And the focus for us is all about, of course, food security, nutritional security. There's a saying in the islands where a breadfruit tree can feed a village for generations. From a nutritional perspective, it's very low in fat, it's gluten-free, and very much a focus in trying to combat the increase of NCDs in our region. There are a number of value-added products too from breadfruit. Some countries, it's very popular. For some of our countries, not so popular. So from this came an initiative that really just emerged in the last few months, called the Breadfruit People. We have a website called the breadfruitpeople.com. And the idea was to create a virtual community where anyone interested in breadfruit could participate. So it's open to the public. And it was launched just 6 weeks ago. There was an inaugural webinar, and there are different topics that they cover. The second webinar was in the first week of May on agroforestry, and then food security just last week. What we found, though, is that from the first week to just last week's webinar, our figures quadrupled. So it is a means of us trying to get information out, disseminate information on this climate resilient crop. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Angela and Meenakshi Ben, for sharing your initiatives. So one of our colleagues is not here. We will just share the work that they are doing in Sri Lanka. So basically they have packaged indigenous crops and products and did value addition activities and called it the pink products. So moving on, when we ask the question, what types of additional support needed for you to be able to continue your innovations and experimentations? So here you see that recognition of farmers, of policies and programs on subsidy, sustainable price policy are in fact needed for them to carry out what they are doing on the ground or at the local level. And also you see that they have emphasized that awareness and acceptance by communities are also needed, and collaboration and participatory research were also mentioned, as you can see in the screen. Additionally, access to grants and credits were also expressed needs, as well as access to good quality seeds, technologies, education, and training, among other things. The farmers have also identified the following as the sources of support for their identified needs. And on the question we have asked on the support needed to better grow and cultivate traditional crops, most farmers have identified marketing and seed system as the greatest need of the farmers who participated in the survey. So we also asked the question, will you start or continue cultivating traditional crops if the support were provided? So you can see the result. 92% said yes. And on the screen here, you see the other suggestions to facilitate and promote the cultivation of traditional food crops. So in the list, you will see sub-regional and technical exchange were given as answers to the question: improvement of existing technologies for traditional crops, incentives or input support for traditional crops, seed centers in rural areas, and consumer education such as exhibits, food fairs, and festivals. And also, as emphasized, policy level intervention are needed. So in summary, we saw the responses that farmers continue to rely on their own knowledge and use existing practices to grow, consume, and sell indigenous crops. And also we have seen that farmers continue to hold the knowledge around traditional food crops. And so this highlights the need to build on their innovation and indigenous knowledge. But also we know, as confirmed by Dr. Ronnie earlier, that there are also knowledge and information produced by institutions and researchers. So I think the question for all of us is how these practical do-how and know-how can reinforce each other. What are the mechanisms? So we have seen in the survey that if we recognize the value of forgotten crops as one of the solution to the issues we now have in our food systems, then that means we have to take into the consideration the challenges surrounding the cultivation of forgotten food. And two of these things that were underscored are marketing and seed systems. However, we have also seen that challenges and support needed are actually present across the food systems activities. So again, we can see the challenges and the demands for support as opportunity for family farmers, researchers, entrepreneurs, and other development agencies to come together to identify action if these will move, if we want to move these forward. So we also have seen in the survey result that promoting innovation at the farm level, continuous cultivation of traditional and indigenous food crops means creating the enabling environment, creating economic opportunities for these crops, which also in turn helps in income or poverty reduction, and also generating consumer demand. We know that in reality, the food preferences of urban dwellers are changing. And it's also important to recognize farmers' experiences. And one way to go is a joint or participatory research from the production to marketing. And I know that this happened in Pacific for the breadfruit and seed program. And addressing barriers and challenges, of course, are also key facilitating or enabling factors. So we call on to you, our partners, and I mean in the collective action and in the development sector, to help us foster the recognition of the capacity of family farmers organization and cooperative to produce knowledge, as we have seen in the survey, and to represent farmers in the policy processes and services to both rural and urban communities. So one of the outcome that was achieved by the Langkan Farmers Forum is actually a policy intervention that helped the farmers have control over their own seeds. And we call on you, our partners, to support farmers' advocacy for public policies that facilitate farmers' access to productive resources, and promote the development and implementation of policies and programs incentivizing the economic opportunities and market for these crops. And lastly, promote the development of incentives for farmers to fulfill their multidimensional role or custodian role and as drivers of rural development. So lastly, after the survey that we have done, it is interesting to know we have received this one feedback from Lao Farmer Network. So they said that the farmers were actually excited about the survey because it's their first time to hear someone asking them about forgotten food and traditional crops. That's all. Thank you.
Irish, thank you. And thank you to your colleagues for really wonderful presentation. If I just comment, the scale and the extent of what you've achieved in the global pandemic and the logistics of actually doing the survey is actually enormously impressive. And your last speaker, and sorry, your quotation at the end illustrated the enthusiasm. Now, can we move to our third speaker in this session, an old friend, Joanna Kane Potaka from ICRISAT, who will introduce the link, I hope, with smart food and forgotten foods. Joanna.
Okay, thank you, Syed. Sorry, trouble unmuting. Padmaja and I are really immensely grateful for the opportunity today for ICRISAT to share some smart food for thought. Now, if you look at the next slide, just to have a little bit of look of history and how we've changed our thinking. So initially the focus was on food security. It was about having enough food to eat Later, we added nutrition security when we were more aware of hidden hunger. And then more recently, we talk about sustainable diets, so diets more sustainable in the environment. But what we're seeing as the next focus is about combining all of these and going a step further. So under smart food, we define it as food that in unison has to be good for you, good for the planet, and good for the farmer. And that hasn't always been added there. Now, on the next slide, you see the biggest hurdle in really bringing smart foods into our diet is what we call the food system divide. So we all know we've got the vast majority of focus on the big staples. And when you invest in something, it does well, so it attracts more investment, so it does even better. And so it goes. And they've been very successful, and they've got very strong value chains right the way through from the consumer awareness through to the farmer production. So it makes it a lot harder to break into that. So on the next slide, you'll see the approach that we've taken. So then if you click again, so first of all, under smart food, we're trying to see how we can mainstream smart foods, and it has to be foods in unison that are good for you, planet, and farmer. Then the next point is about, we convert that into a smart food triple bottom line. Just like companies now are looking at triple bottom lines, we need that for the food system as well. So every solution must be good for you, the planet, and the farmer. Then on the third point there, we had a major focus on specifically diversifying staples. Now, on the next point, you'll see, because staples are typically 70% of the plate across, for example, Asia and Africa, if you can diversify the staples, that's how you can have very big impact. Now, on the next point, you'll see, to achieve this, you need a real dedicated effort on just one or two smart foods at one particular time. And we selected millets and sorghum as the first ones to focus on. And then we see that this complements all the many other efforts about broadly diversifying with these forgotten foods and other foods as well. So we see a need to have both focus, both approaches. And then on the fourth point there, I'll talk about how we've been going about trying to achieve that. So on the next slide, you'll see we've got 4 main steps. Now, the first step is about thinking through the concept, branding this, and making sure there's scientific backing behind everything. The second step was about how you create the demand, making sure this is consumer driven by, you've got that demand pull, and that means involving, of course, processors, governments, etc. However, then we said, well, even if we create the demand pull for these products, these smart foods, how do we know that the farmers and rural communities are really benefiting appropriately? And I think that's what today is about. So I'm not going to go into detail here, but this is about the solutions. What is the role of farmers here? How are they driving this? How are they benefiting? What's really happening? So, and then the fourth step we had is, as you go along, there's always knowledge gaps needing to be filled and science backing behind that, and how you keep having to drive that back into the solution. So then on, I think I'll hand over now to Dr. Padmaja, who's going to talk about a farmer survey that they did recently. Over to you, Padmaja.
Thank you, Joanna, and good afternoon, everybody. So taking forward what Joanna said, like we've suggested an approach of smart foods, but what do we learn from the farmers, and especially looking at it from a gender and an intersectionality lens? What are some of the lessons or the findings that are emerging through this farmer survey on forgotten foods that we have adapted, which Apari had actually shared with us? Next slide, please. So, can you click also, please? So this survey that we have actually conducted was in 2 locations again. So you see that there is diversity. What we would actually like to present here is that we share different insights. It could be based on location. So that is, you have rural communities on the one hand, and you have tribal communities on the other hand. We adapted the protocol shared by Apari into the local language so that it can be easily understood by the communities, followed the ethical principles, and our total sample size was 235 households. Now, we deliberately could not interview men and women separately, though that was our intervention because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had lots of restrictions on us, but still we were able to cover 235 households in these two locations. And I think some of the findings that Irish presented, I think this sample was also a part of it, or if not, my findings are also very similar to what Irish had presented earlier. Next slide, please. So looking at the diversity again that I want to say of what this survey, the insights that we have already generated, but here I'm just presenting a few snippets and we would publish the detailed findings in a separate publication. But you could see that you have this survey, majority of the respondents were the smallholder farmers for whom agriculture was the major source of livelihood. We had the sample respondents were basically between the age group of 41 to 60 years who actually were interviewed during this survey. And then looking at the farming systems, we could see that there was a mixed farming systems. For example, in the tribal locations, you could see majority of them relied on rain-fed agriculture, whereas in the rural, majority of them, about 50% of them were having irrigated type of a farming system. Next slide, please. Do the other click also. So why are farmers not growing these crops, the forgotten foods that we call them? Why are they called the forgotten foods, the traditional crops? And why are farmers not growing them? So what we found during our survey was that about 55 crops belonging to the 5 food groups were grown earlier during the earlier days. And these were not, and we focused on food crops basically, and these are from cereals, roots and tubers, pulses, vegetables and fruits. So those species are now no longer available, or they are diminishing, or the seeds are not available, and hence in the current times only 26 of those crops are being grown in the farmers' fields on a very small scale. And the opportunities and the constraints that we found again that we understood from the farmers was that there were many opportunities that the farmers said. But then let's look at the constraints, because I think that how do we convert these constraints into opportunities so that these forgotten foods or the traditional crops or the neglected crops come into mainstream agriculture. And one of them that I would like to highlight today is the loss of knowledge. Next slide, please. So continuing to be on the loss of knowledge part, I would like to see, as you can see from the above table, you could see that those in the tribal areas, you could see very strong socio-cultural norms around food consumption, food production, food preparation, storage, and also saving it for future use. And that was handed over from generation to the next generation. And so the tribal farmers relied on the traditional or their own knowledge in cultivating these crops and also in consuming them. And they had various reasons of why certain crops of certain species had to be consumed during a certain period in the year. And they had very good reasons about it. Could be for health reasons, it could be for maintaining biodiversity in the communities or in the fields, or it could be for income purposes. On the other hand, if you look at the rural farmers, they were mostly the sources from where they got information about these neglected crops or the forgotten foods was basically a combination of own knowledge and experimentation, but mostly they relied on extension services like training, awareness programs, or other information sources that were available during the social media. So this calls for a very important action point. How can we tap this traditional knowledge that is existing in the farmers, with the farmers, and especially women were the ones who were holding or were the custodians of these traditional knowledge, and also they were the ones who were saving the seeds for future use. How can we use them along backed by science to bring these crops into mainstream agriculture? And a second insight is how can we enhance and empower the agency of the extension workers and other information sources so that this information and awareness about these crops can be brought and it can be made at scale to different communities. Next slide, please. There were many challenges and limitations expressed by the communities in growing these traditional crops. And I would just like to highlight a few. Both the rural and the tribal communities expressed that they had limited or no choice in selection of varieties. Seed production, multiplication, or distribution was a big challenge, as well as conserving the seeds for the next generation. And specifically for the tribal communities, the additional challenges that they mentioned were they did not have enough knowledge or even infrastructure in post-harvest processing, healthy cooking, and then marketing of these crops or produce in not only the domestic or the village markets, but also in bigger markets, so that they earn some income, and for them this type of farming is also profitable. Next slide, please. And adding a gender lens to what were the challenges and the limitations that these farmers shared with us. One of them was, they said that because now as this traditional handing over of knowledge is becoming limited because of families becoming nuclear families, or they are migrating to towns or cities, there is a large scale need for awareness about the nutritional value of these crops. That was the first challenge or the limitation, which we can convert into an opportunity. Then they wanted crops which could be easy to harvest, easy for post-harvest processing processes. Mechanization is available, and many of them said they were innovating by using machines, but mechanization suitable for women, which women could use. That was something that they said is a challenge and a limitation, and which they would actually like to see it. Another important insight was availability of water, not just for agriculture, but for domestic purposes also, because the triple burdens of carrying water, fetching water, fodder, and fuel still less rest with the women, and women were spending most of their time in these three activities. So they were more interested in better water availability. And lastly, they said crops that require less work and effort and inputs. When I say less work and effort, they meant which is not very strenuous, which is not very burdensome in terms of the energy requirements. A particular activity, if it requires a lot of energy, then they become drained of their energy, and they might be having other health consequences. Next slide, please.
Padmaja, could I ask you just to come to your conclusion?
I think this is my last slide. Innovations and support, and as Irish has already mentioned, you could see that 90% of the farmers said in both the locations that they were interested in cultivating these traditional forgotten crops if they are given support with respect to mechanization, plant protection, high quality seeds, subsidies, market linkages, etc. Next slide, please. And this is, I think Joanna would take over from here in closing.
Yeah, I think I can talk very quickly. Just a summary of the key points. It's about making sure we look at diversifying staples. It's also about broad diversification of the crops and the food. We know we need to build consumer demand. We think we need to look at solutions in unison that are good for you, planet, and farmer. How do we build the role of the farmer in this equation? And we mustn't forget gender being integrated into the solution too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Padmaja. Thank you to all the speakers for really excellent presentations. If I take two take-home messages from this session, the first is perhaps we're dealing with the most complex issue facing the future of food systems, diversification and delivering climate resilient nutrition. And I think we then have to show that we can move together, not apart in this venture. And the second is we must not lose sight of the whole value chain, because there are no magic bullets. There's no single solution to the challenge we're facing. And therefore we must look from genetics to market across the value chain in which research supports the community as an empowering agency. So my thanks to all of you, and I'm happy to return you to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Syed. That was a highly informative session on the perceptions of forgotten foods from different audiences. Thank you, Dr. Syed, again, and speakers of first session. We will now move into our next interactive session. The session will be moderated by Dr. Rishi Kumar Tyagi from APARI and Ms. Irish from AFA. Dr. Rishi and Irish, the session is yours.
Yes, thank you, Sasi. So once again, good afternoon to everyone. So the next session is actually composed of three panel discussions. So we will be having three sets of panelists for session 2. And for the first one, we will be hearing from the farmer representatives. So the questions that will be directed to the panelists will also be posted in the chat box. So please take part in the discussion. We encourage you to share your insights in response to the questions that will be posted in the chat box. So may I call on the two farmer representatives. So we have Ika Krishnayati from a family farming household in Central Java, Indonesia, and also a staff of a farmer movement organization, API. And we also have Salome Yasudas, a farmer from Andhra Pradesh, representing the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation constituencies from India. So I have two set of questions for the two of you. So I know that you took part in the survey that we have shared earlier, but in this session, we wanted to get your personal insights and also the insights that you have gathered from your fellow farmers in India and Indonesia. So the question is, how do you think these traditional crops or forgotten foods can be taken into a higher level in terms of policy, marketing, capacity development, farmers' rights, or incentives, just like what we have seen in the survey? And also, how do you think the stakeholders and actors in the research and development and other actors in the value chain, like the business sector, how can they contribute in transforming the production up to the marketing research on forgotten food? So I would like first to call on Ika. The floor is yours. Please unmute and you can speak up.
Hello.
Yes, I
Good
can hear you.
afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Iris. Warm greeting for Central Java, Indonesia. First, I want to thank the organizing committee for inviting us to participate in this regional consultation forum. So I am Ika from API. API is a farmers organization. API also member of AFA. AFA has 20 organizations in Asia. And API also the national coordinator of the Indonesia National Committee of Family Farming, or NCFF. So in this opportunity, I will share our experience in responding to Iris' questions about the forgotten food. So as we may see, the many food crops are now being vanished or eliminated due to many various causes. So it is a decreasing area to grow, decreasing land to grow the forgotten food crops, and also the rapid development programs of the government. So actually the forgotten food is very is considered high. They have high economic values. They also have high nutritious values, as explained further by the previous speakers. So I'll give only two examples from Indonesia. There are so many forgotten crops, food crops. No, there is millet. Millet is very famous in Asia, and also the other forgotten food is tuber crops. It is called porang in local name. So it's tuber. So in English, it is called elephant foot yam or stinky lily in English. So the two of example of the forgotten crops is they have a very high value of nutritious, actually also high economic values if we provide the development or the improvement of the two kind of the crops. They are also tolerant to the environment, such as drought, lack of water, and climate, and also they are more easier. I said it is not easy to grow plants, but they are easier compared to rice. So it is very a good opportunity for people who live in the marginalized land, in drought, a dry land, and where there is a lack of water. And those plants also they don't need so many treatment or fertilizer.
You have 2 minutes, Ika.
Okay, but to grow or not to develop those forgotten plants, we need cooperation among multi-stakeholder, government, researcher, CSO, and also farmers organization. There are important role for each stakeholder. So it is important to stress that we have to put farmers as the key actors of this development, including put farmer in the center of the public policy, and also put the farmers as co-researchers. So farmers actively participate in some research conducted by certain research agency. And also it is important to have development partners such as at the regional and international level to support the development of the forgotten food. So the forgotten can be opportunity for us to maintain our knowledge, our food security, and to alleviate poverty, especially in the rural area and among the farmers themselves. So I think we can elaborate these matters in the other session, in the discussion, group discussion maybe. Thank you, Iris.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ika, for sharing your insights in response to the questions that were posed. So now I would like to call on Salome. Kindly unmute yourself and then share your insights on what you think needs to be transformed or what actions need to be changed in terms of policy or food system activities. Go ahead, Salome.
Thank you very much, Irish. I'm audible?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Thank you. So from the Indian perspective, we have collected the information as many of our colleagues have been presented. Our farmers wanted a recognition from the state as a custodian farmers, especially women and indigenous farming groups, the tribal groups, and the collectors of the crops has to be recognized by the government and the state. And the traditional seed is very, very important. And the seed exchange, not only the seed, but also the knowledge around the seed and know how to collect, preserve, and all this information has to be conserved. That's a very, very primary interest of our farmers. Then awareness programs has to be on a wider scale, especially on the virtues of traditional crops, just not only nutrition and food, but also other aspects, like it adds to the fodder, it adds to the fiber, it adds to the soil fertility when plowed back, and it has a high medicinal values, both for the animal kingdom and for the human kingdom. So these things to be popularized among the entire public, especially among the youth. For these exhibitions, displays, competitions, seed exchange, melas or programs has to be done. And also the participatory research, co-learning process is most wanted on forgotten crops, because participatory research has to be prioritized for the forgotten foods. Then state support for input cost. Many farmers are requesting for the state support, not only for the manures, pest and disease management, and also an assured MSP, that is minimum support price for these unforgotten crops. And also documentation of the ITK and development of technology for processing small grains, especially for the millets, will help women not only to free them from the tragedy, but also give them additional time to get into another developmental activities. And also the storage, seed storage, grain storage, the knowledge around, traditional knowledge around this seed and grain storage has to be revived, and modern methods also be emerged. And this is a very urgent at community level and at a household level, the storage of seed and storage of grain. So research and development can look into this aspect also. And human and animal conflicts, because especially the millets, when they grow in isolation, there is a human and animal conflict. The protection against like wild boars, birds, elephants is a big problem, though there is no, I can say very limited research has done to protect against this. So it is better we look into this aspect also. And because most of them from tribal and slopey and mountain regions, and also slopey areas, forests. So this is a great problem, and one has to look into this if we want to, the farmers wanted to look into this as an important aspect. Then now the flavor of the season is farmer producer organizations. So there is an opportunity to cater these foods, and also create niche markets as ethnic foods. For example, millets, linseed, nizer, wild edible greens, yams, and medicinal plants and medicinal grains and other things. There are so much of properties going on. These are very, very important foods that needs to be purchased, and also sales and procurement from the through FPOs. It will be very good opportunity for FPOs as well as for the farmers. Then another important thing is product development that should come from the National Institute of Nutrition and the Central Food Technological Research Institute, and also the Defense Food Research Labs. Such premier institutions from in India, maybe in other countries also, there must be definitely such premier institutions are there. They should look into the including of the forest foods, to develop ready to eat and ready to cook foods, so that these with the nutritional profiles, so that they get much value, and also ready to eat and ready to cook foods will be popularized, and farmers will get benefit, and also financial benefit also will be enhanced. So that is one request. Product development is from farmers' side, and the programs, schemes, and subsidies for forgotten foods should be designed in such a way that they will help to mainstream, and not just one program just for a name's sake, but they should mainstream these unforgotten foods through schemes and programs. and NABARD and SFAC, that is major credit banks which help financial institutions, should also design programs around these forgotten foods, including wild edible foods, beyond the regular NTFP. So these will help, especially the tribal farmers and mountain dwelling farmers very much. Next, another important thing is India is a large country, as you all know, and public distribution system, integrated child development services scheme that locally we call Anganwadi, and midday meal scheme, that is school children lunch program. So if the uncultivated foods or forgotten foods are underutilized species, these food crops and these foods, if they are included in the food baskets of these large public food systems, that will not only help to get the fresh and good foods for them, but it also helps the farmers immediately to give their produce to these things, and they will be happy to feed their own children, their own families and communities through these things. So it is their request that they should eat what they are producing through these schemes also. And finally, a clear policy for farmer producer organizations, because now in every farmer knows at least the word FPO, farmer producer organization. So this is a great opportunity. They are looking forward to get included with these forgotten foods for procurement, sales, and also value addition. And this is what we have gathered from our farmers, and this is from our farmers' perspective and their thoughts. I thank you for the opportunity. I think I summarized. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Salome and Ika, for sharing your insights and what you have learned of the process. So just in few seconds, I don't want to repeat what they have said, but I think we have seen that there is so much opportunity, there is so much that needs to be done about this food, and there is so much in store as well if we actually move forward in investing on these traditional crops. So we have also seen in the sharing that there are ongoing initiatives even in the earlier session. So I think we have one foot is already there, so we just need to move with the other foot for these traditional crops. So that is for the first set of speakers. So over to you, Rishi.
Thank you, Irish. And we gradually move to the theme 2, that is the perspective from National Agriculture Research System. And we have the 2 eminent panelists, one Dr. Vilas Tonapi, is a very dear colleague and friend of mine. Dr. Vilas Tonapi is the director of Indian Institute of Millet Research in India. This institute is totally dedicated to the millets crops, including sorghum, and you can say for the forgotten crops. He has been coordinating of the All India Coordinated Project on sorghum also, and he's an expert in strategic issues related to seed industry, all issues, research, production, quality, control, and IPR issue, including the farmers' rights. With this brief introduction, Dr. Tonapi, I am very privileged and happy to have you as one of the panelists. You have heard of the presentations and you have heard the farmer's perspective, and you must have noticed that the good thing is that a lot of farmers, or 91% of farmers, are aware about the forgotten crops. They have not forgotten, in fact. So they are very much in their memory. And if the supports are given, if the given supports from the policies or the finance or the technology, they can restart the forgotten crops cultivation. So having you worked for a long time in the millet crops and in a system, ICR system, which is one of the largest systems, my proposition to you that how can research, education, and extension system integrate the forgotten food to blend farmers' practices with new research technologies, because you have seen that farmers also have shown in the survey that they are also adopting, they are also creating some innovation. So I would like to listen from you out of your experience, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rishitagi. Thanks for this opportunity to share our experience in this particular area of millets. The institute is under Indian Council of Agriculture Research, 65 years old, working on 9 millets in India. In fact, somebody asks in the chat box why they are called as forgotten foods and who made it. The issue is what we eat today is what the government policies decide. The lessons learned from green revolutions have indicated that we created monofood systems, monocropping systems. The diversity get lost and the research investments dwindled in these alternate crops, alternate staples, and that's how the entire things were thrown to the background. But I am trying to share here in a nutshell our experience in this group of crops. So farmer is the center point. In fact, this century should belong to the smallholder farmer. We need to build the ecosystem of value chains around him. If we do that, then only we will succeed. The small snapshots here and there are not going to take these foods to a commercial scale, because what we need is the scalability. This scalability can happen with institutional support, the government policies, and also the linkages with the various stakeholders. So we feel that the establishment of a strong value chain and the supply chain is the key. But if it has to be done, we need to involve the biodiversity groups, the smallholder farmers, the local germplasm, and that's how we started that 20,000 accessions getting characterized for various traits, including nutrition profiling. And we said traditional varieties could be branded in terms of the marketability. So that is what is the key in order to involve the farmer and the biodiversity group at the very outset. Second is releasing these particular varieties and the germplasm from where we have lost it. The mapping has been done. These crops were cultivated earlier, but they are not there now today.
Dr. Vilas, you are not audible. Maybe some problem. Okay, to save the time till he fixes internet, may I move to the another eminent scientist from the National Agriculture Research System, who is working in the National Agriculture Research Institute in Papua New Guinea, Dr. Birte Komlong, and she is the program director and the NARI. So
Rishi, I am back.
Okay, please continue. Please continue. Sorry, apologies, Birte, I will come to you later. Please, Dr. Vilas, continue, please.
The connection. So I was going to the third aspect is the access to quality seeds. And if at all it has to be done, farmer participatory involvement in the research programs of the institute and also participatory evaluation of the varieties becomes very, very important. And the third aspect is region-specific varietal improvement and building the seed systems is the third aspect which we have tried to provide. Now, the government of India's policies around the dryland agriculture, the investments in dryland agriculture have improved. Now we have a millet mission in India which focuses on 14 different states which grow millets. Not only from the awareness to the production to the value chain strengthening, we are also creating the farmer producer organizations. 10,000 FPOs are getting created, and our institute on our own, we are creating about 200 plus FPOs for the millets per se. So
sorry to interrupt, Dr. Vilas.
Sir.
In fact, since you have been working for a long time, so we want to have a perspective in general Asia, because the Asian conditions are almost similar. So here I would like to bring you back to the focus that how you can integrate the farmers' knowledge and technology with the public sector or the National Agriculture Research System to promote the forgotten crops. So I know you are a man of few words. So in few words, could you say that in the region, how we can integrate the farmer's perspective? Because the whole discussion is farmer-centric. With that.
So, yeah, Rishi, I think the farmers need to be part of the entire research program. The extension strategy needs to be in a different way. It should be around value addition, value chain, giving a branding to the varieties they have. So if we can really create a niche, and then the institutions involved would establish seed systems around them, I think they are going to be connected to the value chain. The key here is creating demand, changing the food habits of the people. And when we want to create, you have to create the change in the food systems. So if at all it has to happen, the entire range of value chain development needs to happen around farmer. So farmer need to be involved in capacity building, in value addition, in value chain development, and connecting him to the market. The digital platforms need to get created. We have created 2 of them where the domestic buying and selling also happens with the FPOs and the farmer groups. So in isolation, it is not going to happen. Institutes need to be involved with the farmer. Policies need to be favorable. Investments need to happen in order to create 6 positive points. One is branding of farmers' varieties. Second is creating marketability for that. Third is the awareness program to create the demand. Fourth is value addition and value chains, which institution capacity building can happen. And fifth is the platform to bring him to the global market as the other crops have been brought into picture.
I think, Dr. Vilas, you have made your points very excellently. And a very quick intervention I would like to have from you in the next question, that what innovative, because I know that in the South India, particularly, the lot of this promotion of the millets or the forgotten food is there. So we would like to get benefited out of the experience in India through you, that what innovative cultural, religious, and heritage ethos can be brought into the promoting forgotten food for enhanced production and the profit to the farmers.
Sir,
very briefly.
Forgotten foods are linked to the tradition and our culture. Farmers themselves are a culture to a country. So what is our experience basically is to linking them to the stakeholders. How to create demand around that needs to happen with the stakeholders, whether it is the markets that created around the food system, whether it is the chefs, doctors, the nutritionists, and other stakeholders. If we can really create around that, and the awareness programs would say these are good for you and these are good for the lifestyle diseases and their prevention. That is what it needs to happen. Telling people you need not have to have it in a food this thing, but mainstream it at least 20% of them into your food plate every day. If it can happen through awareness programs, road shows, and various governmental programs and advertisements, I think this will happen. And second is governmental market is the big one, whether it is the midday meal scheme, public distribution systems, minimum support price, and the third is linking them to various nutritional programs of governments would really pave way for mainstreaming these forgotten foods.
Thank you, Dr. Vilas. In fact, the topic is so interesting and you are so richly experienced. I want to continue, but because of the paucity of time, I will stop here, and if time will permit, I may come back. But now I move to Dr. Birte Kamlong. I already introduced. She is the program director in NARI. And Dr. Birte, you are here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, I can see you. Thank you so much. I have in fact, Pacific is the unique ecosystem, and they have the unique problems and the prospects and a lot of things in the different when the small island countries are concerned. So the participants would like to be benefited from you that if you will be providing the broad perspective of the researchers and farmers of the Pacific in general toward the forgotten crops.
Yes, good evening, everyone from Papua New Guinea. Thank you for inviting me to present some perspectives on behalf of the Pacific in this consultation. As you mentioned, the Pacific is quite a unique environment, and broadly, it is a huge body of ocean with lots of tiny dots of islands. Aside from Papua New Guinea, who's clearly the biggest country. And from the food system perspective, it's very heterogeneous. What is common are that traditional food systems in the Pacific are based on root and tuber crops and bananas. And there's a high diversity of all those varieties with high beta-carotene, anthocyanins. But in some island environments, we also have very special crops like swamp taro, which is a Certosperma species, or as mentioned, breadfruit that have a very significant role in food systems. Aside from that, we have a very rich diversity in leafy, nutritious green vegetables like taro leaves, ibeca, pumpkin tips, amaranthus, and so many more. But unfortunately, like in many other places, there's a trend throughout the Pacific towards the processed food and reliance on imported rice as the main staple food. And it has gone to that extent that many can't imagine a meal anymore without rice. And that had disastrous consequences on the nutritional status with huge problems in non-communicable diseases. And a number of Pacific Island states are on the top list of obese countries in the world. So it appears that
just intervention, Dr. Birte, what you are trying to say is that Pacific is also realizing the importance of these forgotten crops, though the crops may be different than the rest of the Asia. Is that the point you are trying to make? And then if that is so, then I know that you have been the national focal point of PNG for ITP-GRFA, as well as you are working for more than 25 years in agriculture research and development system. So where you see that the role of innovations and the farmers to promote forgotten crops in the Pacific region. So any level of innovations farmers are adopting or creating, we would like to listen from you about this aspect also, please.
I think for that, I just like to, with the aim of that, we want to transform food systems and bring back the importance of forgotten food. We need to really understand from which perspective we set the agenda in doing so. And to me, it was more in line with what previously was done as part of the smart food concept. And that is really to me is that the consumers are the driving force in the transformation as the end user in food systems or food products. And unless there's a demand for better, cheaper, more nutritious, diverse food producers, would have no incentive to respond to that demand. And it's not only urban consumers, we are talking about the rural communities and farming households as well as consumers. Because otherwise, why would we have people selling their nutritious food just in order to buy white rice and tin fish? So clearly the role of researchers is to understand in the different contexts of what are the changes that need to happen and what are the bottlenecks in the end to respond. There's certainly a huge need to address productivity, that we need to, yes, productivity and quality, because most of these crops are not researched at all or very little. So we do not have guidance to those who want to produce on what can they do to produce more, to produce better, and to produce in the end what the market would want. But in the end, with food and with people, there's a very big need to actually raise awareness, to educate, we need to change mindsets, attitudes, and perceptions. People need to want to eat diverse food. children need to be exposed to from a small age to a diverse diet and explore taste. And maybe we need food processing innovations to use forgotten foods in ways that make it more attractive. Now we all have our favorite dishes with the favorite ingredients, so maybe we can replace some of them and make it tasty for tourists to come and have their lasagna with local Pacific ingredients. In that, clearly farmers play an important role. They are the producers of food and food products. Farmers are the custodians of genetic resources. But they are also consumers as well, and members of a community. And in that, they have to take a very active role in as part of transformation of food systems, as has already been pointed out.
Yeah, I think. Thank you, Dr. Birte. You have given the overview of Pacific in general and about this in relation to forgotten crops particular. Thank you so much. And I would not like to recapitulate what the panelists have mentioned. It was explicitly clear for the paucity of time. But I would like to move to the theme 3 of this panel discussion, that is the strategies for transforming agri-food research and innovation system. And I have got the message from Dave Scherer from COSI that he has to attend some meeting. So I will take the liberty with the apologies from my colleagues, Martina and Nora, that I would like to invite Dr. Dave Scherer from COSI, who is the deputy chair, who is the deputy head of the Secretariat Commission on Sustainable Agriculture Intensification. And Dr. Dave has led organizational change in navigate a complex global operational environment and empowered global teams by working collectively to contribute to organizational mission. Dr. Dave is very much involved in the sustainable agriculture intensification. And Dr. Dave, from your experience and the studies, vast studies you have made on the investment, I had 2 questions, rather one question and one request to respond to in the short time. That what are the pattern of investment in agriculture innovation, and who are the recipients, particularly in Asia Pacific, because you had done a very excellent study in recent past, and how investors can be attracted for innovation in forgotten foods. The second request is that could you give a 1 recommendation or 2 recommendations for the in Asia Pacific Manifesto related to the sustainable investment for innovations? So these are the 2 questions I am posing before you, and time is for you 5 minutes. I would like to listen from your experience to get the benefited by all the participants. Thank you. Dr. Dave.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rishi, and I'm really pleased to be here. If you can just move to the second slide, just in terms of time, and for everyone to note that I've put a web link in the chat for some more information about COSI, the Commission for Sustainable Agricultural Intensification. So, and COSI, the Commission, is building an evidence-based portfolio to increase the investment in innovation for sustainable ag intensification across the global south. And I'm going to try and use the evidence that we're producing to answer those 2 questions, well, 1 question and also the recommendation. So let's first of all consider the pattern for investment in innovation across the global south. Now, this pattern of innovation investment is not related to forgotten foods. It's related to a study that we've done looking at the total level of investment in ag innovation. And so that total level of investment is somewhere between $50 and $70 billion. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually only 4.5% of global agricultural output, which is actually not a large enough investment to focus on innovation. And if you look at the energy sector, globally, the energy sector invests about 6% of their total output into innovation. And it's that kind of sector where we're seeing the drive of renewable energy, etc., that we could benchmark against. But let's first of all look at the left-hand side of the graph. And this really relates to the question of where the money is coming from, and then the right-hand side directs to where the money is going. And I really want to concentrate on that left-hand side of the graph for the people in the audience. So when we look at that total spend of $50 to $70 billion per annum on innovation, on agricultural innovation, the largest amount of the pie is spent by national governments, domestic governments. And so that equates to about 35 to 45 billion. So the largest segment of investment is coming from national governments. And when we look at that segment, and just in terms of strategy for engagement, when we look at that segment, and lots of the presenters have already alluded to this, that investment is aligned principally to government policy. And so we've heard the mention of school feeding programs, etc. You know, there are policies around farmer income, etc. And so it's really important to align strategy there with the objective around the government policy. The second largest component of those investing in innovation comes from the private sector, principally around large global agribusinesses. And the audience would recognise that these businesses look particularly for economic gain, and they're looking for value propositions where they invest. For the audience to recognise here that the private sector splits that spend somewhere between $9 and $18 billion between inputs and marketing, and very little in between. And so in terms of strategy, in terms of engagement, if the forgotten food sector is to look at the private sector in terms of an area of engagement, it's important to recognise that split. The third largest component in the pie comes from the traditional development partners, ODA funders, development banks, multilateral and bilateral partners. And what's important to recognise here is that they're a reasonably small part of the pie, but they're incredibly catalytic in their approach to investment in innovation. However, if we look over the last 10 years, they've been relatively stagnant. But more importantly for the audience here, the move has been towards a greater level of investment in scaling rather than the investment in the early stages of research to try and generate that new knowledge and understanding. And the fourth and final component of the investment pie comes from private equity and venture capitalists. Now, I think this is a key one for the forgotten foods area to consider, because it's this area that's growing quite substantially, and it's this area that has a greater level of risk appetite when they're considering investing. And they're investing in new and more entrepreneurial ventures. And so it's important from a strategic point of view that the forgotten foods and those involved with the seminar today understand that breakup of where the investment's coming from, what moves there are, and how they can engage. And if we add to that what we've already heard from the audience about being demand-driven, although responding to consumer change does come with its challenges and risks, particularly around an example such as quinoa, and I've seen that referenced in the chat. But I really like Joanna's preference around what's good for you, what's good for the planet, and what's good for farmers. So now let me conclude with the one recommendation, if I can, Rishi. So if I was to suggest a recommendation for the Forgotten Foods group to consider, what I'd like to say from an investment point of view, and just considering how this investment is structured and how you might engage with that, but what I'd like to recommend is ensure that the investment in innovation in Forgotten Foods addresses the multidimensional aspects that we globally are trying to deliver. Aspects around the economy, aspects around the environment, and social aspects, and ensure that the investment that is derived and has an influence on those forgotten foods is able to have an impact in those three elements of a sustainable future food system. And let me conclude there, Rishi.
Thank you, Dave. In fact, very eloquently you had given the pattern, and it is very short but very insightful. And the recommendation, in fact, it will be very useful. I think the organizers would like to include in the manifesto. And thank you, Dave, and thank you to keep you waiting for a little more time because you were tight with your schedule. And thank you, Dave. With that discussion or the presentation from Dave, I come back to the original structure of the panel discussion. And as you know that APARI is very much involved in the agriculture research and innovation system in recent past. And a lot of engagement from APARI side in the AIS, and Dr. Ravi is the chair of the TAP, the Tropical Agriculture Project of the FAO, and Martina Spaciakova is one of my colleagues, is also contributing very significantly in the TAP project. So here I would like to call upon Martina, who is currently working as Knowledge Management Coordinator in APARI, and she has more than 16 years experience to manage the knowledge management and communication portfolio in several organizations like IFAD and UNESCAP in Indonesia. So Martina, I hope you are there.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me well, Rishi?
Yes, I can see you. Thank you. So Martina, out of your experience, and because you have been involved in a lot of studies and making the presentation during the TAP and the other fora about the agriculture innovation system. So my question to, first question to you is that based on your experience while conducting these studies, what innovative strategies can be used to promote the forgotten foods? Martina.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Rishi, and good afternoon to all of you from Vienna. Very sunny day here. So Rishi, so as the speakers demonstrated today, and also Dave has actually set the context, which I'm actually very grateful for. What we have been seeing in the recent years is that there is a shift in the ways innovation in agriculture is perceived, including, of course, in the diversification of food production and consumption. And what we have also seen is that the emphasis on technology generation in agricultural production, which has been mainly for scientific advances, has increasingly been shifting towards kind of more system thinking in solving development problems with farmers at the center. So this shift towards the agriculture innovation system perspective, which also Ravi mentioned, emphasized at the beginning, considers involvement of many different actors as innovation agents. And this also includes farmers as well as other influences such as the enabling environment, which of course reflect the local context. So I think Nui has been presenting the slide, which I wanted to show you, is where you can see these different actors, how they are connected in order to bring these existing new products and processes, as well as, different forms of organization into social and economic use. And of course, they need to be working together with supporting institutions and policies in the agriculture and related sectors. So Irish emphasized the need to facilitate innovation and experimentation with farmers at the center. And in my opinion, to determine the mechanisms of how to do it, what is absolutely critical to understand is to understand innovation from the system perspective, which is not to develop individual capacities alone, right? So we have been developing capacities of farmers, of scientists, and other stakeholders, but to do that alone is insufficient to bring about the change that we envision. And this is something that we have also seen in the recent studies that we have done with FAO on assessing the landscape, regional landscape of capacity development for agriculture innovation systems. So these capacity development initiatives, including the mainstreaming, of course, of diversification into agriculture, need to be linked with other dimensions as well. So in addition to individual abilities that need to be developed, this also means developing collective ability of organizations to provide a space for organizational learning about food diversification, but also co-creation of knowledge with other types of innovation stakeholders, innovation actors, we call them. And it also includes the strengthening of this enabling environment dimension that provides the institutional setup and policies. And I'm sure like my colleague Nora will elaborate on this after my presentation. And what I'm trying to say here is that these dimensions, these three dimensions need to be addressed holistically rather than separately in our strategy to bring the forgotten food back. And using Joanna's words, this could be maybe a new triple bottom line for our capacity development approach in forgotten food. But this approach also requires integration of innovative and transformational learning mechanism, which is based on blending of technical skills with other sets of skills and knowledge, as well as attitudes and behaviors that are really needed to create this interconnectedness between the three dimensions and also the different types of actors. And our APARI community, and also of course under TAP, we call these functional capacities. And as Ronnie mentioned earlier, we need to be able to build bridges and bring new professionalism in order to better respond to farmers' interests and demands. So this is actually very much related to what has been said today already. But why am I saying this? So when it comes to integrating this forgotten food back into farmers' production, research and policy agendas, but also consumer tables, it requires really strategies that integrate this transformational learning. And this is something that I think should be in the manifesto as well. Under the Tropical Agriculture Platform, which is hosted by FAO, as you mentioned, Rishi, APARI has been integrating this model into our various activities by developing functional capacities, for example, to navigate complexity, to collaborate, to reflect and learn, engage in strategic and political processes in innovative ways that all lead to this improved capacity to adapt and respond through innovation. So in our collective action to promote the forgotten food, I think we need a strong strategy which is based on this transformational learning. And this is to create opportunities for critical reflection. I think Syed mentioned that at the beginning. Critical reflection on really what we learned from the past in terms of successful and less successful initiatives, how we build on the local knowledge, but also how we bring about these new forms of interaction among the different stakeholders in order to
Martina, a small intervention that we have to be mindful of the time also. And you have very, very clearly mentioned that how the innovation system, or what is the perspective of the agriculture innovation system regarding the forgotten crops. But very quick intervention from you, from very brief intervention, that how, on the basis of your studies, how effectively farmers can be engaged in transformation of innovation system. Could you give the one or two lines about this, how effectively it can be engaged?
Yeah, thank you, Rishi. No, I think they need to be absolutely engaged in a co-creation of knowledge. So there need to be links, especially when you are looking at the diagram that is presented. I mean, there are different bridging institutions. Of course, APARI is working at the regional level, but there are many others. And I think we need to be able to develop these kind of innovative partnerships that are really reaching out to farmers that can involve them, but also research itself. Because I really believe that, like once we integrate these evidence-based approaches, we work with farmers, this could really lead to better understanding also of farmers' needs and a shift in mindsets, perception also Birte mentioned. And I think this is really needed, this kind of dialogue with farmers and really creating this kind of understanding, but at the same time, really thinking about how we can work together and bring these forgotten foods and crops, back to the table. But of course, these related practices with involving farmers as well. So, of course, after the development of Manifesto, I think there will need to be some kind of a strategy of how we can do this. And there are very important lessons, like also from the work of Joanna on smart food. And I think this whole awareness raising should need to be connected to it. So we need to look at the system as such and bring this kind of holistic approach to our work with farmers.
Yeah, thank you, Martina. Thank you for your presentation and the discussion. It's very useful. Thank you. Now I switch over to another of my colleague, Dr. Noura Omar. Noura Omar is currently working as the policy coordinator in APARI, and she has been leading the project on ASTI, which is funded by IFPRI. And currently she is also working for the MORL activities and medium-term review of APARI for the strategic plan. And and Noura is in fact currently based in the Papua New Guinea in Pacific. So Dr. Noura, you are here, I hope. Dr. Noura. Oh. No,
sorry,
somebody
can. I was.
Oh,
muted.
okay. Okay.
I was muted. Yes, sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, Dr. Noura, you have been working in the Pacific, and then you have been working in Southeast Asian countries on the ASTI projects and collecting a lot of information about the agriculture, research, and the investment, and all that. You have prepared a very good report. So, out of this all learning and experience, regarding the forgotten foods, I would like to listen from you that what are the barriers for developing enabling policies for the forgotten foods? Because you have heard the survey and you have heard the speakers and the discussions. So from your point of view, what are the main barriers for developing the enabling policy for forgotten foods? Please.
So thank you, Dr. Rishi. Very quickly, in response to that question, so policy development can be quite complex, and it requires an understanding of the policy-making process, the nature of the evidence or the information to be presented for making the case to decision makers. It also needs an understanding of the political context in which you're trying to present your case for influencing decision making. And also to understand the stakeholders who will be involved. So in that sense, and in the context of forgotten foods,
Dr. Noura, some problem in your voice.
Hello, Noura. Sorry to interrupt.
Noura, can you switch off your video so that you will be audible?
The lack of evidence or the
Noura, can you hear me?
On forgotten food that is.
Noura, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Noura, may I request you to switch off your video so that you will be audible clearly?
Okay. Yeah.
Just switch off your video. It will work, hopefully.
Sure. Yes, Dr. Rishi, I can. Yeah.
Noura, you are there?
Dr. Rishi, I think we lost Dr. Noura. She's joining.
Oh, okay. That to make the use of this time, we will get back to Noura if she will be available soon. Otherwise, I think I will refrain myself to recapitulate the points, major points, what the panelists have done, well, panelists have made. And we will be capturing all those points in the manifesto. Now I would like to hand over to Irish, my colleague. Noura, you are there? I think there is some problem, so we should not waste the time. Irish, you are there? Oh, sorry. Noura, you are there?
So connected.
If your audio system is working, please continue. Otherwise, just fix it and we will come back to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear me. Please continue.
Okay, so maybe very quickly on that first point, and I'm very sorry about the internet connection.
Yes, first question.
Some of the barriers that can appear, Yeah, so you were saying what are the barriers for developing enabling policies, and I had mentioned that it can be a very complex in terms of developing the policy. And very quickly, some of the barriers can be in terms of that there is a lack of evidence or lack of information on forgotten food that is needed to support policy development. So maybe we have all the information, but it is not getting to the policy table for making the decisions. And then there's also maybe the lack of engagement by concerned stakeholders with the policy decision makers on forgotten food. Another point could be that there's poor dissemination of the evidence or the information on food policy, forgotten food to the decision makers. Another point that can be seen as a barrier for developing enabling policies is that sometimes there are stringent bureaucratic processes that may hinder or delay approval of policies favorable to food, to forgotten food. Another point could be that there's lack of political priorities on forgotten food, but also important ability to access and analyze the best for applying in formulation of policy.
Okay, Nora, very quickly, one point or one-liner answer that since this discussion is farmer-centric, then how do you think that farmers can be engaged in formulation of policies and the implementation of those policies? What could be the effective role of the farmers? Can you visualize that and give your opinion and viewpoint?
Thank you, Dr. Rishi. So I think one way that that the concerns of the farmers can be addressed in policy formulation and to ensure that their engagement in policy implementation is that the farmers or the farmer organizations. So the idea is that farmers can play an important role. Hello?
Your voice is broken. So if the time will permit, I will come back to your question again. In the meantime, if it is fixed, then please let us know. Otherwise, I will move to the next item. Because of the paucity of time, we are already late. I'm sorry, Nora, my apologies, but we will come back if your audio is fixed and time will be allowing us. Thank you. Please bear with us. Irish, I hand over to you. And as I mentioned, I will not recapitulate the points. So Irish, if you can conclude the session, please.
Yeah, Rishi, you can ask Nora to write her points in the chat box and you can read for everyone.
Yes, that can be done. Nora, if you are listening, you can mention your answer in the chat box and I can read it out later. Irish, you please continue, and that in the meantime, she will send the reply and we can read it out.
Yes, Dr. Rishi, thank you. So actually, it's very short. I think there's so much that has been said by our farmer groups earlier and also the succeeding speakers. So I am also following the conversation in the chat box. So I can see that people are already posting lots of work that has been done, initiatives that has been done on the ideas that we have been talking about during the session. So I think what caught me is that how do we bring this together, that bridging factor, and then moving forward these ideas that's already been going on, and the interest that is looming around forgotten food because of the context that we currently have, and how can we use the existing opportunities. We have the Food System Summit. We have the pandemic that has revealed the change that has been done. So how can we build on these big opportunities to present forgotten food, traditional food, as one of the key solutions to the food system that we want. So with that, I think it's now high time for us to move on to the next session. So back to you, Sasi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rishi and Irish, for having this such an interactive session. Now we will be moving on to our next session, which is like a breakout session, where you will be having an interaction with the farmers from different regions. So I now request the participants to click on the breakout rooms and then just click join when it is prompted to. So this breakout room sessions will be moderated by Dr. Varaprasad for the Central and West. Ms. Esther will be moderating for Southeast Asia, and Dr. Oliver King will be taking care of the South Asia. Nora Omet will be taking care of Pacific region. We also have two breakout rooms for the South Asia. So the other one will be moderated by Irish. If you have any problem or trouble during the breakout rooms, you can get back to me. So now I'll be just splitting the breakout room sessions, and you are all kindly requested to click join when you get a prompt to join your respective breakout rooms. For the kind information of the moderators, we'll be keeping the breakout room discussion short for 20 minutes, and I'll be closing the breakout rooms in 20 minutes. You'll get a notification when we have 2 minutes left, and then I'll be closing the breakout room with 30-second indication. You may all please select your breakout rooms and you can join it. The breakout room has been created. So some participants will be staying here in the main session and having discussion with Dr. Oliver King. Dr. Oliver, you can please take over this. I still see few participants haven't joined their allotted breakout room session. Please go ahead and join your rooms. I also request the moderators to not close the breakout rooms, please. All the moderators or the co-hosts, kindly please don't close the breakout rooms. I'll be doing it, and I request you all to not disturb closing the breakout rooms. It has been closed again, and I'll be opening all the rooms. Please join the respective rooms, and we'll have a discussion for 20 minutes.
Yeah, you can project that slide, Shashi. Single slide.
Dr. Varaprasad, Jack, you can join the central group. It has been created. And all the other participants, please click on the breakout room and join your respective breakout sessions. Your moderators have already joined the session. Please go ahead and join. I see most of them haven't joined it.
Shashi, can I go ahead?
Yes, doctor, we still have few participants left, but you can go ahead and I'll just tell them to join their respective sessions. Just a few more seconds, like 30 seconds for them to join their respective sessions.
Okay.
Kindly click on the breakout rooms and then you will have an indication to join. All the participants who are still listening to me, please join your moderators. Those from South Asia, you can remain here and you can have the discussion with Dr. Oliver King and his team. some participants from Pacific, Wong, Lynn, and Kong, you can join there. You've been already pre-allotted. Kindly join your sessions. Now I'll just leave the session to Dr. Oliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashi. Good afternoon, one and all. This is Oliver King from MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. Happy to have all of you here. And since this afternoon or since morning, we have been listening to different speakers, and we were, talking about or discussing about the forgotten crops and its relevance in this context of global pandemic, as well as in the context of climate change and other factors. So you would have seen there is a farmers declaration that has been posted in the chat box. You would have, some of them would have read, and many of the constituency members in India, they have already read about this. So what you must be seeing the slide here. This is a essence of the farmers declaration that has been already placed in place. So the purpose, now we have left with another 20 minutes. I will not be speaking much. I will request all of you to share your thoughts in different sections. This farmer declaration is based on the survey that we have conducted across South Asia. And specifically, we need to see that how it is relevant to our context, especially the kind of Indian context, what is relevant to us. And you see here kind of a synopsis of different actors and their role as needed by the farmers. For instance, here, government is one critical actor. They can contribute to promotion or valorization or nurturing these forgotten crops, and associated actors. And research organization, what is expected from the research organization by the farmers as expressed by them. From the CSOs, community-based organizations, CBOs and community-based organizations, civil society organizations, what the farmers they are actually expecting. Similarly, from the development partners, donors, and also consumers and publics. So this is what actually farmers themselves, they have declared what they want from their perspective. So here in this audience, I see that multiple actors, different actors are there. And I request all of you to join here to contribute in terms of what is missing here. That is what important. We are not going to repeat again and again what we spelled out earlier. And you can read out. I will be, showing a couple of slides one by one. And for instance, here, this set of declaration is from the farmers' point of view pertaining to government. For instance, this talks about securing rights of the farmers in terms of natural resources, landscapes, and so on. In a holistic manner, it should be conserved. Similarly, massive campaign needs to be there. That should be promoted by the government. Development programs provide incentives for the farmers and associations. Create markets for traditional crops. Provide farmers markets to road and electricity, practical need of those farmers living in a very tough terrain, in a remote terrain, and so on. Adequately, finance public research institutions, those who are dealing with these neglected crops, unused crops, and so on. So these are the expressions by the farmers and farmers related organizations. They have already shared with us in terms of farmers declaration. Now I want, maybe in another few minutes, in the chat box also you can share your thoughts. My colleague Prashant and Girijan and Manjula, they are there. They'll be culling out and placing this with us. And soon after this presentation, we will be making this presentation to the whole audience. So if there are any specific points missed out here in this slide that is pertaining to the government, you can highlight here. So we will record it. Similarly, for different actors, we will go one by one so that the points or the left out points are captured in the farmer's declaration. Your perspectives are needed from the farmer's point of view, not from the other agencies' point of view. Yeah. If there is anything, I will type it down. If there are anything, you can I think people can open their your mic and you can speak out. We can jot it down here, or you can put it on the chat box also.
Those who want to speak, kindly raise your hand and we'll help you unmute.
Yeah, there is one. One person has already.
Yeah, I think he's not unmuting. I'm trying to.
There are 110 odd participants are there here. Maybe I'll project it once again. Many of the points as expressed by the farmers, they have actually shown here. You can read out this, and if there are any missing elements, very critical elements from the farmer's point of view, which we need to cover in the manifesto, in the declaration, you can speak out, or you can put it in the chat box. If not, we will, I will take few more minutes, then I will go ahead with the next actor, critical actor. Shashi, you can look out for people raising hands and give the opportunity.
Sure, Dr. Oliver. Yeah. Participants, if you have any doubts or points, discussions, please raise your hand and I'll help you unmute yourself. You can have discussion with Dr. Oliver.
This morning, I heard from the speakers also.
Yeah, we have a participant from A Dialogue. Kindly unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah, hello, Dr. Oliver.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
So I want to, understand, and maybe we can add certain points from the discussion
Sure.
to look at the whole perspective from the Biodiversity Act. So when we think about biodiversity and its conservation, I think the farmers are the biggest, or like even the tribal population is the biggest contributor to it, because their knowledge is something which is so precious, and they are kind of the beholder of that knowledge. So how can we connect this to the Biodiversity Act and can ensure the farmers that the return of their knowledge is going to come back to them? Ensure, right? Like that's the right word. Ensure that there is a return on their knowledge that they are holding from centuries. So this is a perspective that I wanted to.
You mean the benefits that that could arise out of the knowledge the people they are holding in the context of agrobiodiversity and forgotten foods. In Indian context, Biodiversity Act has got a provision, so that has to be realized. That's what you try to communicate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Doctor. Is there any other critical points like this left out?
We have Tapas Roy wanted to talk. You can please unmute yourself, Tapas Roy.
Hello.
Yes, Doctor.
Hello.
Please.
Sir, I want to raise some 3 points. Actually, I'm Tapas from Koraput.
Please go ahead quickly. We have limited time.
Sir, MSP of the grains should be assured at the ground level,
Sure.
because that is the most important where farmers are facing now.
Definitely.
Another thing is that, as we know, the farmers are mostly small and marginal farmers. They are growing millets in their most of the season, if we see the Kharif season, and the consumption, no doubt, millet as the part is the part of their diet. Only to see a single crop, that is ragi, but the other crops which are missing from the plate, and that the consumption is required to bring more nutrition in their diet. Like if we say the minor millets or every minor millets, if the decentralized processing millets unit are installed in the ground level, I think that will help the farmers in the long run.
Okay. So you're saying 2 things, 2 points, critical points: MSP and the
Yes, sir.
crop diversity and dietary diversity. So the focus has to be focus.
Yeah. So dietary and millet processing.
Yeah, processing also, right? Facilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, facilities.
Fine. Any other points? Otherwise, we will move on to either if there is any other critical points left out. You see that here, most
Dr.
of the.
Alingar, we have a question from Deepak Mangesh.
Sure.
Deepak, you can, yeah, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to bring the tribal farmers who are living in the national park or tiger reserve kind of regions where even I'm working here in Mysore district, Nagarhole forest region, because for them they can't practice agriculture using any machinery. So the forest department has restricted those people from doing using any such devices. So how can we help them out?
Okay. So people do not have access to kind of extra facilities like, processing facilities and so on, since they are living inside the, restricted area. How the government can help them? Is it, doctor? Fine. Okay, is there any other point? Otherwise, we will move to the next actor. You can also put it in the chat box. If there is any point, my colleagues will call out it. And we will move on to the research institution, the role of research institution from, the farmers, they want these kind of support system from them. They say that collaborate with our farmers organization, support and prioritize conservation and improvement of these crops, assist seed-based enterprises, conduct experiment as a participatory way, translate research outputs on traditional crop to different audience, particularly for a wider public so that the attraction can happen. Then include representative of farmers organizations in research program, particularly in the governance and policy making and so on. So this is what, targeting to research institutions, the farmers are saying. If there are any critical aspect missed out here, from the research institutions point of view, you can indicate few points here. Maybe most critical one. Yeah.
Yeah, we have Dr. Batmaja.
Yeah, please. Dr. Padmaja, please.
You can please unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we
can.
So with respect to what is being discussed, I just wanted to add one point is not to forget about, the gender dynamics here, even from a research organization or be it from a development organization as well. So my point would be like when we say farmers, maybe we look at farmers not just as farmers, but then we are very careful in mentioning that we look at the marginalized farmers, the vulnerable farmers, the poor farmers, women farmers, men farmers, etc. So I think bringing about the gender dynamics into this whole conversation in framing those points would be very useful so that we are constantly reminded that we should not be forgetting this. I think that I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Dr. Padmaja.
Dr. Oliver, I would just like to have a kind reminder that we have 5 minutes left for the discussion.
Sure. Dr. Murali is there. Can you allow?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, see, research institutes have to record various traditional knowledge against each of the forgotten crops. Because when you say forgotten crops, it's also forgotten technologies. So because if you start something afresh as a research institution, you need to know what people did in the past. So that is a huge base of knowledge that you can, instead of reinventing the wheel, you will have to do it. And the second thing I thought is, somebody has already talked about the post-harvest technologies of various crops that are considered as forgotten fruits. We may not know how to process. I think that also needs to be understood appropriately.
Thank you, sir. Is there any other element? Otherwise, we will quickly move on to the next dimension.
We have Nirmal Kumari.
No, we encourage, if there are any left out points in those aspects, because we have to run through, put it in the chat box, we request you. And I will move on to the next one because we need not, we have to cover other communities also, agencies also. Now, the role of NGOs, role of CSOs, if there are any, as expressed by the farmers are less known, because many of them, they are some way or the other, they are associated with the non-governmental organizations or civil society organizations. If there is any from the representation of the NGOs here, based on the farmer's voice, if you want to communicate something, you can do it here. There are a couple of points came in. Launch and support awareness program, strengthen capacities related to farmers organization, advocate that farmers organization and cooperatives for policy and programs that promote traditional crops. These are the three aspects the farmers, they demanded from the CSOs and NGOs. Mostly like popularizing it on the ground and strengthening the organization's capacity, and also link it with policy making as well as programs. These are the critical role they perceive that can come from the NGOs and CSOs. If there is anything left out, we can quickly do it. We have a couple of other slides also. If you feel the points are covered here, I will move on to the next one. That is the development actor and funding agencies. And they have said, farmers, they said that invest in small farmers and their organizations. So that particularly the enterprises that is coming up, popping up through farmer producer organization, FPO or companies and so on, there is a lot of investment is needed. That's what they say from the capital point, physical capital point of view. That was expressed in the form of processing units, threshing yards, and many others. Support for enterprises and its related infrastructure was critical one we received from the farmer. If there are any other aspect, particularly from the funding agency point of view, more investment needs to come. So this is another aspect they have expressed. If there is anything, we can cover it here.
We are also receiving some inputs from the chat box, Dr. Oliver. So
Sure.
maybe we can.
Yeah. I think my colleagues are taking it.
Yeah.
We will assemble it together.
We have a question. I think Dr. Ramesh wants to add some points.
Sure.
Dr. Ramesh, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, please go.
Good afternoon, sir. This is regarding initiative to government. I am suggesting. Can they include this into public distribution system, sir?
Yeah, please. Thank you. That was actually included in the manifesto. We will in the public distribution system. Yeah, PDS. And the MSP program and the PDS and the noon meal program, public sponsored Nutri mission programs. This forgotten crops needs to be included. That we will share with the audience. Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir, can I make a point?
Yeah, please.
With respect to this call, farmers call on development partners or funding agencies, I think if there could be some kind of an incubation park or an incubation center established, where some farmers may be having some innovative ideas, which actually needs a lot of hand-holding and mentoring and linking them with the correct private sector organizations or linking them with the processing industry or some research organization. I think if we can do some kind of like have an incubation center, that would also help the farmers in building their capacity as well as becoming entrepreneurs also.
Sure,
Dr. Oliver, we'll be closing our session now, considering the time limit.
Can you give 2 more minutes so that the last one?
Sure.
Okay. So consumers and markets. The market is one element which is missing. So probably some thoughts from here, because they could not express it more explicitly from the farmer's point of view. So the market is a very critical actor. Since morning we have been hearing that that is what the most demand comes from across the country. And the seed system is one end, the market is another end. So there are a couple of points I gathered. I will share directly in this particular section, particularly targeting, labeling, branding, and marketing, and valorizing these crops, reaching out to the mainstream population. That is the one area a lot of investment needs to come from the public-private partnership programs. Because the poorest of the poor living there and they're raising these crops, living out of it. But if it has to reach out to the mainstream population, the private partnership, private sector partnership, their investment is critical. I will add this point here. And there are other aspects of it, policymakers also, the critical actors. There are some elements already have come. We will synergize with that point. I think, Sashi, we have done within this time available.
Yes, Dr. Oliver, or maybe we'll just give 30 more seconds. I would also request you to just summarize this when we end this breakout room session.
Definitely.
As a key element, and then we will ask the other moderators to add if they have any new points with what you mentioned after we close the breakout sessions. Thank you, Dr. Oliver.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have Ramesh wanting to speak. By the time I close, maybe he can give his short views.
This is Ramesh. This is Ramesh Babu.
Yes, sir.
Regarding marketing point of view, can we have tie-up with airlines and also the five-star hotels, because this is a nutritional point of view. People, elite people may like it, and airlines and also five-star hotels can be tied up with the marketing basically.
Okay, you mean you are saying that the regulation related to the public-private marketing? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
I hope we all are back here in the main room. Thank you so much for your interactions, and I know this is a short time considering the topic we are discussing. Now we just close this breakout room session and we'll move on to the final session of this webinar. May I now request Mr. Alexandro to take over the session for Carlo? You are on mute, Alexandro, in case if you're trying to speak. Yeah,
yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. So we don't have Carlo with us. Maybe you can please take over this session as a moderator.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Oliver, may I please request you to stop sharing the screen? We'll go ahead with the session and Alexandro will be leading us. Thank you. Thank you,
Yes,
Dr.
thank you.
Oliver. Thank you all the moderators.
I just require you to give me, please, the outline of the session because I don't have it under my eyes. Thanks. Yes, so we are to share the key outputs from the breakout sessions. So I would ask the moderators of the breakout sessions to share one by one the PowerPoint integrations that they have been preparing so that we can all see them. So can please, maybe I will start with Oliver. Can Oliver share the PowerPoint of the new points that have been integrated into the Farmers' Declaration?
Thanks, thanks, Alexandro. Can I start now?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. So we had a wonderful session, and there are about 180 participants. They have joined with us, and we have shared the key essence of the Farmers' Declaration already. We have prepared, and there are 5 actors, critical actors. Already, the farmers they have identified, and we have only looked for the missing elements in the Farmer Declaration already being prepared. So many of the critical aspects covered in the declaration are here. In addition to that, during our session, there are critical points came here. For instance, in India, there is a Biodiversity Act, and also the Protection of Variety and Protection of Plant Variety and Farmers' Rights Act. So there are many crops and varieties and associated knowledge and its benefits can be, supported by these 2 critical legal dimensions, legislative dimensions. This is one of the critical, suggestions came through from the audience. And the other aspect is that the minimum support price that has to be, listed. There are several crops were listed in the country. There are many less known crops needs to be added to that, so that the poorest farmer in the remote regions, they can benefit out of these minimum support prices. At least when we plan for a kind of local distribution and management system, this MSP for the local crops, very, very essential. Then the third dimension is that diversify approach in terms government to support crop diversification and dietary diversification. So in other words, by doing so, this automatically help in terms of valorization and promotion of these crops in their the environment and their living space. Then there is another dimension came from, there are tribal communities living in the forest area. They source in-use crops and varieties and tubers from the protected area like national parks. So there are areas where the other facilities like processing and other facilities that cannot penetrate in. So the government should thought about, while we talking about valorizing of these in-use crops or varieties or tubers, which is a part of their food culture, how the government can support to it. Then the PDS, inclusion of these in-use crops in the PDS was one of the suggestions. And also we gathered that the approach should be farmer-centric, and the FPOs and seed institutions to be nurtured by the government. Mission programs on forgotten crops needs to be diversified across. Now we have examples from millets. And the other dimension is that the government to support integrated approach, that is also essential. And the digital platform that was that can cater, linking these crops to global markets. These are the other dimensions that also we have gathered from during the discussion this morning. Moving on to the next actor, research institutions. There are aspects that we have covered. However, these are the critical dimensions which was missed. There is a gender dimension. This morning we heard about it. Gender dynamics and dynamics and dimensions related to the forgotten crops and its environment needs to be documented, carefully looked into it. Gender disaggregated data onwards, looking at gender sensitive approach, gender transformative approach is what actually expressed in the suggestion. Then TK, record TK, traditional knowledge related to the forgotten crops, and it is not only the crops and also associated technology. For instance, processing of those forgotten foods. There are local equipments, methods, the farmers and the communities, the women, they practice it. That has to be recorded and documented, and it has to be, analyzed and mainstreamed to the science. Then post-harvest technology that has to be understood for various crops and diversity. Moving on to the next dimension related to NGOs and CSOs, there are a couple of suggestions that came in. Couple of suggestions that came in. NGOs can play a pivotal role in terms of creating awareness and strengthening capacities and so on. And funding agency point of view, one critical addition has come that is investment for incubation centers, because there are diverse crops around farmers and communities. There are incubation centers. Science and technology needs to reach to the local community. That can be done through incubation centers. That can be localized, not much centralized at the state level or something like that. It can be localized because many of these crops and communities are living in remote region. So such approach is very vital. That is what the audience they thought. Then related to the public value of work of farmers and others, we have actually taken up in the declaration. And markets, there are a couple of things came in. Public-private partnership is very, very critical in the area of when we wants to valorize it and try to mainstream it, popularize it. Fair trade mechanisms, public partnership, private partnership, their investment that has to come for the forgotten crops. Regulation is another aspect of it, because many times the poorest of the farmer may be exploited. So their government as well as market system should be harmonized in terms of creating a regulation around these forgotten crops and groups. This is what in short time we have gathered in our group. I request other colleagues in the breakout session also to join with this. Shashi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Can the other colleagues illustrate what has been discussed in their breakout sessions, please?
Yeah, I can go. So for the group, it's a small group that we had. So I think around 11. I think there was a problem with moving. So yeah, this is the things that the group wanted to add. So for the government, we call on the government to support the federating of farmers. So it's possible to have national networks of farmers organization and even national cooperatives. So I think in Southeast Asia, the problem is the legal environment. So we call on the governments in Asia to enable this. And then also there was a suggestion on farm gate processing to avoid the exploitation of farmers. And there are also interesting activities that has already been done, like festivals, fairs. So we strongly believe that they make a big role in really promoting the value of traditional crops. And some of the examples given are on root and tuber crops and millets as well. And same with what Oliver mentioned, there was also a suggestion to call on for a minimum support price for forgotten food and incorporate it into the nutrition programs or institutional procurement wherever it's possible. And on the CSOs, the addition is to also look at their bridging role. How can they really support the family farmers in the whole advocacy for these forgotten food? And then there is a question that was raised and is up for debate to the partners moving forward. Where is the private company in all these work on forgotten food? How to engage them? Not necessarily the big companies, but maybe look at the role of SMEs, MSMEs in the work on forgotten food. And also, what is the role, what are the farmers saying on the role of the education sector, youth, and also integrating it into the education system, like the curriculum. So maybe we can also look at that. And there's also an idea to look at the bridging institution. What's the role that the farmers want for the bridging institutions to do? How can this bridging institution really facilitate learning for transformation? And then also, how about the investors? What is their role? And like the venture capitalists, what are their role in this work? And then also financial institutions, what is their roles? Maybe they can be sensitized I think the word has been used, the triple bottom line business framework. It's popular, so maybe the forgotten food can take advantage of that. Lastly, for the research organization, these are the opportunities. So help in building the capacity of farmers to be entrepreneurs, also support the self-help groups, or look at the women groups, the existing women groups, and also on seed material availability. So I think what was being said here is it's high time for the gene banks and research institutions to give back to the communities the seeds that belong to the communities, or the genetic materials that belong to the communities. And a very interesting point, don't look at these crops as breeding materials. So look at the whole picture, the culture around it. And then also there is an idea of instead of new development of new varieties, to go for participatory crop improvement. And then same thing with what has been said, so nutritional analysis of these crops, and as much as possible do research in the farmer's field. There are examples that were shared, like farm science centers. These are already being done. And then promotion of community seed banks and development of seed hubs. So this is from the group.
Very much, Irish.
Yes, Alessandra, can I go next?
Please go ahead, Esther.
Yes, so this is what our breakout group, it's composed of representatives from Southeast Asia and South Asia as well. So first, on the recommendations for the government, we added emphasis on nutritional diversity and thus mainstream forgotten foods for the sake of nutritional security. So when promoting the policy, it's good to also say that forgotten foods addresses challenges on healthcare costs, which are brought about by non-diversified diets. So playing on or harping on nutritional biodiversity and how forgotten foods achieve this will be a way to influence governments to enact policies on forgotten foods. Third is consult and involve the farmers in policy-making processes. Okay, government to implement projects on forgotten foods, because when you have projects, then you will have some kind of funding to really do something on forgotten foods. Then put more investments on research and innovation on forgotten foods, and develop policies where researchers, farmers, universities, and private sector will jointly promote forgotten foods. It's basically encouraging projects and policies that encourage a multi-stakeholder approach in research and implementation of the promotion of forgotten foods. Okay, for research institutions, we added to allocate funds for the research on forgotten crops, to do a listing or a database on forgotten foods in the country and even at the regional level. So there is recommendation to do a validation of indigenous knowledge on forgotten foods, like really asking local communities and farmers and maybe researchers on what is the value of this forgotten food and how do you propagate it, then put it in a database which is open access to all, not only at the country level, but also at the regional level, and at the regional level or even at the country level, this can be hosted in one place. And our friends has said that a very good example of this is the crop-based knowledge system in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, then researchers can also do focus group discussions as a way of implementing participatory action research. With CSOs, we recommended in addition that CSOs will document the experiences of their work in the field on forgotten food, because many times the CSOs are very weak in the documentation and sharing of experiences. So there is a recommendation to strengthen this work of documenting their experiences. So we were not able to go to the others because of lack of time. So back to you, Alessandro.
Thank you very much, Esther.
Yeah, can I speak? Varaprasad.
Please go ahead, Varaprasad, please.
Yeah. There are actually 9 people participated in our session, and many of them are not belonging to this region, but they had interest. But particularly from Iran, there was a participant who contributed. There are not much additions to the Farmers' Declaration, but 2 or 3 points very well emphasized. The first point is these forgotten food crops, the current generation has a perception that they are not for human consumption. So that means they were indicating that there is a lack of research on food or menu or presentation of the food, which is also equally important if you want to make them popular for human consumption. Food research is extremely important. And then there is also very little or no participation from the private sector, and that needs to be encouraged. And they think that universities should take a major role in public awareness, particularly the importance on the public health of these forgotten food crops and the climate resilience that they have got and nutritional factors that they have got. Universities should take a key role in training the or designing some short courses and giving to the general public also, not only just courses. Then the traditional knowledge of the farmers is completely ignored, and that requires to be formalized. That means whatever on the knowledge is now owned by the farmers, the tribal groups, that should be documented and brought into a formal education form from the schools to the university education. That was one point which they made. And the most key point, and which needs strengthening of the actors in the processing and other value chain, these different steps, investments are not there, and also capacity building is required. And people, consumers value the environment. The importance of saving the environment by growing the forgotten foods should be educated and should be included. These are all the points which just came up, which are strengthening the Farmer Declaration on certain aspects, as I told you here. Thank you very much. That's all I would like to say.
Thank you very much, Varaprasad. I think we are through with the group presentations, right?
Yeah, I think yes.
So
we
I think
Pacific. I'm not sure if Nora has. Oh, she's having bad connection, so we'll move on to the next session.
Yeah, so we move on to the next session, please.
May I now request Esther to present on the key elements of Regional Draft Manifesto for Asia Pacific. And we also request Dr. Murali, Dr. Rishi, and Dr. Jonna to reflect after Esther's presents her slides. Thank you. Esther, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Actually, I'm still in the, this is a work in progress. So there is a regional manifesto, a draft regional manifesto that has been prepared as a preparation for this. And colleague Irish has flashed it here. So in the draft manifesto, we could see that there are several aspects so that we could transform agri-research and innovation system for forgotten foods. But first, before even discussing that this transformation, on how this transformation will be achieved, the manifesto will look into what is the meaning of forgotten foods. No, so there, we in the regional manifesto there is a meaning of the forgotten foods or the neglected or underutilized crops. And what is the in the manifesto? There is also a section that explains or that describes the current situation right now: land degradation, biodiversity loss, hunger and malnutrition at the global level and in Asia. So these problems make us look into the potential of forgotten foods, because from what we know and what research know, forgotten foods, the traditional and local food crops are nutritious and are healthy and are climate resilient. And therefore, to promote and to like mainstream forgotten foods in our diets, no? Mainly is we need a transformation of agriculture research and innovation system. But what we have discussed in the morning is something that has really inspired me, because we are here, research institutions, farmers organizations, non-government organizations, universities, governments, and we are all saying that the transformation of agri-research and innovation should be done in a multi-stakeholder manner, involving everyone who are here in this webinar today, but having at the center and at the heart of the transformation the farmers. And that means looking at their concerns, looking at their needs, looking at their traditional knowledge, looking at their wisdom, and looking at their experiences, looking also at their limitations, so that we can pattern our capacity building and our policies and our investments with this. So in that aspect, in that broad aspect of multi-stakeholder partnership, maybe you could flash that again. Then we need to do all these things. Can you flash this? Yes, we could have novel research networks that is multi-stakeholder but generating knowledge, and then focusing on agroecological approaches to cultivating and processing forgotten crops. Because if we do, for example, in a way, like if we want to produce more or more yields for forgotten crops, but do it in a chemical intensive way, I think it is not the way to transform. No? So we focus on agroecological approaches. Then we do effective awareness raising. So we have lots of examples already on how to do effective awareness raising, and capacity development to look into especially the farmers, what the farmers need. And then evaluation of forgotten crops, in terms of increasing the awareness of the public of their nutritional value and their resilience to climate change and their cultural richness and sustainable livelihoods. Okay, and then participatory plant breeding will be examples of farmer and research partnerships. Advocacy and evidence-based policy change. So what we have discussed as validation of traditional knowledge and having a portal for the knowledge that has been that is there on forgotten foods by both farmers and researcher. And what is more important is also respecting the rights of the farmers to use, save, exchange, protect their traditional knowledge and do benefit sharing. And market. So this one has come very, very empathically in our meeting today. You know, said we need to develop and create markets for forgotten foods, a demand on forgotten foods by consumers and by the public. And to create this demand means creating awareness for the value of forgotten foods, but also improving through food research, the palatability, the kind of recipe that can be also done, especially to gain more acceptance in eating and consuming forgotten foods. Better access to markets would also mean having more roads, more bridges, and electricity to process the forgotten foods in a full value chain approach, with farmers in the governance of these value chains, and as well as catering first to the domestic market, because shorter supply chains would be addressing and supportive of the environment. And shorter supply chains will mean more incomes and livelihood opportunities for many farmers. So in short, our manifesto can put the elements of multi-stakeholder partnership with farmers at the center, with markets, developing markets as a pivotal, maybe an entry point, and the awareness raising, the technology, the research and innovations on how to create this market and how to meet this market demand through agroecological approaches. That can be the focus of the research and innovations, which will be participatory and involving farmers in all process. So back to you, Sasi.
Thank you so much, Esther, for summing up the entire webinar and the perspectives. So may I now request Dr. Murali and Dr. Joanna and Dr. Rishi to reflect any more ideas other than what Esther has mentioned now?
Yes. Oh.
Please go ahead, Joanna. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, I'd like to just make one point which came through really strongly for me today. Now, Esther answered half of this really eloquently, and I think we've got half left still to answer. What I found people kept struggling with today is the real clarity on the role of farmers. Now, part of that's because the solution is not only the farmers. Everyone's talked about the whole value chain needing to be involved, and everyone's role in this. So what I think we've got left still to make really, really clear is the leadership role of the farmers and how they co-create. So Martina, for example, brought up a lot about how do we interact? How do we co-create? What are the new methods that we're going to use to ensure farmers not only input, but they're actually leading and co-creating? So I think if we can make sure that's really clear so that it's easier for people to follow the manifesto, I think that would value add.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for adding the points that are the key points that are discussed, which has been missed in the slide. May I now request Dr. Murali to add very few points considering the time? Please try unmuting yourself now, Dr. Murali.
Yeah, thank you so much. Earlier I could not unmute for some reason. Anyway, from the South Asian context, I think I have 2-3 points to talk about. First of all, on the manifesto itself, I think it's very gigantic, and it is taking perhaps the role of a government, entire government, to make the foods popular and managing on their own. So this is a kind of task that we have. So we need to be very ambitious and really bring in various actors into this, as Esther was talking about. One of the things that really we will have to bring into the fore is about the nutritional security of the crops, because now we already have most of the countries today, at least we have crossed the barrier of food security per se in terms of total amount of food, but nutritional security is bothering more, and therefore we need to concentrate on such crops which will give you nutrition. It may have a low yield, we might try to yield it better, but that is one thing which we can be part of the manifesto. And the second point is, I think it is overwhelmingly coming out, is the the constraints of economics because we are not getting the proper price for the farmers, etc. I think here we have to depart from the typical agricultural model to perhaps a commercial model, or because nowadays people are not, or a farmer is not able to determine the price. Can we federate all those people who grow this kind of a crop and make we are going to determine like a company who determines its price? Can we determine the price? This is one challenge that we have today. Perhaps that we have to look into those aspects as well. And third point, see, from my agriculture degree days way back in 1980-81, I have seen this machines going on. For example, underutilized crops, it was called in a different way. Perhaps even now the Indian Council of Agriculture Research still calls it underutilized crops, because my colleagues are also heading such programs. We have not really, in the last 30 years, I would say, we have not really able to make a headway into popularizing these so-called forgotten crops. So this is something we have to understand why we have failed, because despite all these projects that we have, I think that is what is very, very critical in your hands, and see that how we have to move ahead with the understanding of how we failed rather than what we are going through. I think this analysis needs to be taken. And the other point at the manifesto we might have to very, very subtly talk about is the misinformation against diversity of crop that's going on. And this is where we will have to put into some ideas as to how we usher our programs, particularly on the forgotten fruits, to raid away from that misinformation on various crops that are there, which is primarily coming out from various other, perhaps say a developed country perspective, as to why certain crops that are grown elsewhere are good than that were local. So this kind of a misinformation also need to be addressed as a part of the manifesto, though it may be very, very diplomatic, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Murali. Now I may request Dr. Rishi to give his points.
Thank you, Sasi. I'll say the time. I will do two things. One, I have got the presentation from Pacific room, and I'll just show the slide. And in the meantime, I will make 2-3 points from my side. Is that slide is seen?
Yeah, we can see it, Dr. Rishi.
Okay. In the meantime, while the participants would be seeing the slides, and I can mention that in nothing very new, which already these points are already captured. So I will avoid to read it, just go through it. And in the meantime, 2-3 points which I want to make, and which probably had not been included in the existing manifesto draft and the discussion, although most of the important points have been captured. But a couple of points I want to make from my side. One is that I picked up from I'm having the curiosity from the day presentation that there is a need to create the investment opportunity, and investment opportunity for collaborative research and development and marketing linking also. I have studied somewhere in my previous years that agrotourism is also one of the important areas where the private sectors can also come invest with the farmers and bring the profit to the farmers, at the same time the agribusiness also. So attracting the investors, one area is the agrotourism, and it is successfully being practiced in India in some parts of the country like Maharashtra and the southern part. And then the investment for the processing to enhance the promotion of forgotten food. because processing plants sometimes with the subsidy, the government, they established, but the sustainability is not there because so many factors are there. So processing is integral part of value chain. And at the same time, it should be sustainable. So I don't know in what wordings we'll have to include in manifesto. That point one want to make it. The second point I want to make it the prioritization of crops at national level, because forgotten crops are so many in each country. If you name them, you will develop a book. But what we have also is done some exercise in 2017 on underlying crops. That was also emphatically mentioned that at national level, we should identify the priority crops, which are very much in the vogue in practice, or the cultivation, or the important, or have the food value or marketing value. At national level, they should be prioritized. And then, in fact, we did some exercise of the country status report of 16 countries we compiled in 2017, published in 2018 from APARI. So some status of the crops or forgotten crops are mentioned, but it is incomplete, is not complete. So national level, it should be completed. And I cannot refrain myself being a conservation scientist that we should not forget the conservation is equally important, which doesn't find the place in the existing manifesto. And I think we should emphatically mention that in promotion of few crops, prioritized crop of the forgotten crops, we should not forget the other which are having the second priority or third or fourth priority. So the germplasm is equally important, not for today breeding program, for the posterity also. So the germplasm conservation in all forms have the different methodology should also be addressed into the manifesto. Thank you, Sasi, for giving the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rishi. I know we are behind the schedule. We are now coming to the end of this webinar. It gives me immense pleasure to invite Dr. Ravi Khetrapal again to give his vote of thanks and the closing remarks. In the meantime, I also request all the participants to stay with us. So after Dr. Ravi finishes, we will be having a group photo session. Dr. Ravi? Dr. Ravi, you're still muted in case you're trying to. Okay.
Thank you, Sasi. Thank you so much. Well, I have a pleasure to give the closing remarks, and fortunately, we did not call it summing up. It's not possible to sum up such a rich presentation, rich ideas, and so many things which came up in the last 3.5 hours. And I'm also sorry we are overshooting time, so I'll be very brief and crisp, especially for the people in the Pacific, where it may be late evening hours for them. Okay, first of all, I may say in the closing remark, I was overwhelmed by the rich presentation and discussion. I was not expecting such a rich engagement by so many people from the region and beyond. Secondly, I think we have conveyed the message to each other, which we will now convey to the global community about forgotten food, the various aspects which we would like to cover in the regional manifesto to be finally absorbed in the global manifesto. What I have seen is like we are starting from scratch if we look at an organized way of working at a global level. But we do have a good structure of Smart Food initiative by ICRISAT, which Joanna presented very briefly, where we have an organized approach. There are a lot of lessons to learn from there for this given platform to see how we carry it forward. Because that is already an organized structure which has made a lot of good efforts to move forward. And what interested me was one of the questions in the chat box where someone said, no global plan of action should be made till our surveys are completed. Thousands of farmers we have surveyed. And it was highlighted that more tribal communities and leftover regions and all should be done. I may like to say here, this is just a glimpse of what is going on. First of all, we didn't have a survey in a very scientific, statistically significant manner. We did not take out our observations, but it gives a fairly good idea of what is farmers' perspective. I think it's a very good idea. Now we can have a structured approach to carry it forward, definitely. It's a very excellent beginning done in the region. And also, we could see with various presentations, the questions which came up. One of the questions which really was interesting was what went wrong in the last 40 years. That is one. Then how the quinoa story, how it bounced back, which was a forgotten food, how it bounced back. There are a lot of things we need to see to that. And what are the benchmarks to declare a food as a forgotten food? There were questions on proactive push required and demand-driven only, which was highlighted. And also, market linkages were highly stressed, and some point which most of us missed but covered in the chat box was on the importance of forest food, which are all forgotten food, especially for the urban areas. And there are forest food festivals and all, how we can bring all that to the limelight. And also, one point which was mentioned was a need for knowledge and innovation broker, where we have the functional capacities built in a multi-stakeholder platform. This was a very important point which we will carry over in the manifesto to see how we carry it forward. Then all the breakout sessions came out with rich observations. I'm not going to repeat. I'm going to conclude here by saying we really need to redefine the role of farmers, which was highlighted by Joanna. We need to be very strategic in our approach. We need to have a clear generic strategy to move in the biggest region of the world, the Asia Pacific. And we also need country-specific strategies on mapping, on policies, on awareness, on research, on innovation, on development, on value chain, all aspects. And for all that, what we have been missing so far in the region is a clear communication strategy. It's a platform where we are communicating, but there's been no clear communication strategy of this. And there have been in silos, there have been organizations, efforts which were being done. And now since we all have come on one platform, I think we really need to look at the investment opportunity highlighted by Rishi also. And we all should endeavor to create a regional platform on forgotten food, where we can take up all the issues we have discussed and many more we have not discussed because time was short, and it is a very rich subject. With this, I would like to say a big thank you to each and every participants, first of all, then to all the organizing partners, Asian Farmers Association, Swaminathan Research Foundation, Bali Development Institute of Rural Women, where Mr. Yogesh, due to being down with COVID, could not come, but they were participants otherwise. And then a big thank you to GFAR, to Alliance Biodiversity CR, and Crop for Future for their such a strategic, regular, rich engagement with us, literally hand-holding all the partners in Asia from the last 6 months on a small call of 6 hours or 2 hours or 1 day, they will be on the Zoom for discussion, which is something very unique we found. And this is what we call collective action. So with this, I would like to thank each and every one of you, to all my APARI colleagues also, and especially to Sasi Rekha, who had a very strenuous job to be alert all the 3.5 hours, and who has done her job quite well. And to my colleague Nui, who had been presenting all the PowerPoint presentations, and other colleagues who have been working behind the scene. Thank you, one and all, and see you next time. If we have another kind of a webinar, and I think that this webinar gave us food for thought for many more webinars of this kind. And once we finalize the regional manifesto with a small group in the coming days, we will share with all of you. When I say we finalize, we will semi-finalize. We'll share the draft with you, and we'll finalize with your comments further, which you may still like to give before we give it to GFAR in the coming 2 weeks. Thank you. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ravi, for such a great closing remark. Now, may I request all the participants to keep your video on? We'll just catch a few screenshots and group pictures of the webinar. So on the count of 1, 2, 3, cheese, yeah. We'll be just capturing a few more pictures. We have a large group, so I kindly request you to hang on, please. I'll be just taking a few more seconds and then we'll be done. Thank you so much for your patience. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. With this, we now come to the end of this long session. I know we've taken your time, but this is definitely worth all our times. Thank you so much again. We'll meet you soon in other webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.